Under the light of the eclipse, a devastated land is revealed. A screaming larva prepares to attack. The protagonist, with his determination, shouts back at the larva. He stabs it inside its mouth, hitting vital points with his dagger. It doesn't give up on devouring him and keeps trying to bite him. His strength almost gives out from holding the larva for so long, but it was enough for it to finally die, allowing him to rest his arms. Panting while wiping his face from the creature's blood, relieved to finally use his power, a colleague calls out to him. Powerful giant creatures and brave warriors face off on this terrible battlefield, waiting for the meager strength we saw before. The two complain that the protagonist is not doing his job as a baggage carrier. He apologizes to them for being distracted trying to survive. They just ignore him, leaving him alone to collect the remains of the corpses. He is left alone with his empty feelings. This world changed after the Abyss was discovered. An abyss that is another dimension where the monsters that once lived only in human fantasy live in reality. After the discovery of the Void, humans started awakening powers, and with these powers, they kill these new creatures and explore the Abyss. The notorious standard of judging a person is no longer their personality or effort, but their awakening rank. The strongest face horrible creatures, while the weakest work as slaves to the strongest. However, the protagonist is not one of these powerful awakenings, but a simple unawakened carrier who carries luggage. He calls for the others after finishing collecting all the loot, but his astonishment upon turning back leaves him speechless. Everyone else in this desolate land had died while he was the only survivor. The awakened ones gave no signs of life, lying on the ground. He didn't even have a chance to finish his question. A single voice declares that he is the last remaining. A giant being appears behind him, looking at him with disdain. This infamous being is Asmodeus, the rank SS monster. In a desperate attack, he tries to strike with his weapon. In response, Asmodeus simply raises his hands towards him, exerting a bit of force to make his arm explode. He falls to the ground in pain from his torn arm. Yet despite all this pain, he tries to get up again. But the creature uses its energy on his head at the same moment. Not understanding anything anymore, the protagonist only has questions about how he died. His memories flash before his eyes, seeing his dead parents, the things he received at school, and his life being ignored as a nobody. As the monster's energy invades his body, he just curses his life for ending as a mere damn loser. In his last moments, he just wanted to awaken his powers. These last moments of cosmic energy declare that the conditions for his awakening were met. A completely white being emerges from the cosmos, looking down at the protagonist. He questions what is happening. The cosmic being does not respond and only observes. He turns to look, certain he had died moments ago. He sees himself and Asmodeus frozen in time. The cosmic being finally speaks, questioning if he had no questions about how time had stopped. The protagonist asks who he is. The only response he gets is that others call him King, but it is not important to know his name. The king says he will grant him his authority. Meanwhile, the protagonist is too immersed in doubts to fully comprehend the situation. The king says it's not good to be so distrustful. He chose him because he admired his tenacity and will. He aims his hand to deliver his powers. He says that if the protagonist waits patiently for an hour, the answers to his questions will appear. But until then, he will know nothing. An absurd mass of power falls on the protagonist, and the vision of the place becomes obscured. As he slowly opens his eyes, other voices speak to him. The first sight upon opening his eyes is of a guy slapping him. He is stunned by what he sees. The bullies prepare to hit him again. They laugh while the protagonist is slapped several times in the face. But his mind is elsewhere, or rather, it was definitely in the abyss moments before opening his eyes. He doesn't care about the slaps he receives and just focuses on trying to understand the situation. When the word authority comes to his mind, that's when he starts seeing strange things. In his vision, an attribute window appears. He observes that his age is marked as 19 years, meaning he went back 16 years in time. He starts laughing with joy even while being slapped non-stop. His loud laughter makes the bully stop hitting him, until he is dropped to the ground thinking he had gone mad. The bully yells but doesn't notice the punch coming his way. The blow even makes blood come out of his mouth. The colleagues are surprised by their friend being sent flying with just one hit. Meanwhile, the protagonist laughed more as he realized he had acquired the power he so longed for, the awakening. On the school rooftop, the situation was unyielding. He cleaned his wounds as he prepared for the worst. The two used their powers and charged the protagonist named Kim Tae-in. He dodged the attack and prepared with a clenched fist. A left hook was thrown at the opponent's chin. In an instant, the other boy received a kick to the stomach. Kim Tae-in had done everything possible in his previous life, from physical training to researching all available information about the Abyss and abilities. Therefore, there was no way two teenagers like his bullies could have the slightest chance of defeating him in a fight. With just one punch and two kicks, it was enough to knock them to the ground again. But even perfect technique needs the perfect physique to keep up with its movements. The first bully who fell to the ground got up and used his powers. His body filled with a stone skin, an ability that strengthens the body with stones that emerge from it. He sent his stone fist forward, but Kim Tae-in ducked, dodging the blow. Another swift punch was sent to his right, narrowly avoided. The bully jumped high with both hands ready to hit hard. The whole ground was broken, raising a cloud of dust. He thought he had finished the fight, but coming from behind was Kim Tae-in. He reacted when he sensed his presence. but it wasn't enough to avoid getting punched in the face. Blood splattered again when the punch landed. But the blood wasn't from the bully since he had protected himself with his stones, and the blood came from the fist that hit him. When Kim Tae-hyun realized he hurt his own hand, another stone punch was used, giving little time to react. He barely defended himself and was sent flying by the force of the impact. He crashed into the building, stopping him from being thrown off the rooftop. He was badly injured and surrounded by debris. The bully calmly walked towards him. He talked about knowing his own limits, and asked if he was going to run as he did earlier. But even a day before such a situation, he felt no fear and recalled the information he knew. All abilities have their own ranking starting from F, the lowest, to S, the domain of those called monsters. The only ability he had was an unknown ability that no one had ever heard of, and it was still ranked F. The bully was surprised to see Kim Tae-hyun getting up. He stood accompanied by a crimson aura, and even though his opponent's ability was stronger, he didn't feel like he would lose this fight. The aura began to radiate fiercely throughout his body. He was stunned to see his target had awakened an immense power. Kim Tae-hyun felt his magic move according to his will and saw that the aura came from the power of predation. The bully strengthened more with his stone skin and charged at him. He just raised his hand quickly with his aura still active. At the moment of collision, he activated his predation ability. The bully didn't know what was happening, while he increased the intensity of his power more and more. In the motion of closing his hands, the power was nullified and the stone sprang from his body. The students acted normally without noticing anything, but suddenly, an explosion of force formed behind them. The dust gradually settled. Kim Tae-hyun stood while the other teenager fell unconscious to the ground. He found himself in a position above the fallen opponent. A voice in his head said that the predation was complete, and as a result, his power rose from rank F to rank E. Kim Tae-hyun's hands began to petrify, showing that a new ability had been registered. The stone skin was taken by him, and his entire fist became a solid rock. When suddenly, the scene changed to the school infirmary. The nurse was open-mouthed, seeing 3 injured youths being carried by another. Kim Tae-hyun greeted the nurse, trying to disguise himself. She shouted in confusion at the situation. The 3 boys were laid on the infirmary beds. The nurse used her healing abilities to treat their wounds. She tried to question how they all got injured, and he lied, saying they fell down the stairs. After healing in the infirmary, he left the school and walked the path home. Immersed in thoughts after today's battle, his daydreams were about his predation ability. In the past life, he trained all his life to increase the rank of the ability, but today, in just one fight, he managed to increase its rank. An F-rank ability that can surpass the strength of a C-rank and also steal other abilities from defeated opponents. He was filled with questions about why that king gave him this ability and why he returned to the past. Even with countless unknowns, he thought there was only one thing to do now, and that was to learn more about predation. Finally, he arrived at his house. He looked nostalgically at his home as it had been years in his memories since he last returned. He remembered that when his parents died, he started living with his uncles. A smile appeared on his face. He entered the house thinking if he should look for more information before his uncle arrived later. He reached the living room and saw 3 unfamiliar men and his cousin. He asked why he wasn't at school, but then his eyes widened as he realized something. The box his cousin was opening was full of money, and memories of his past life returned. He remembered how his cousin wanted to be with the delinquents and stole all the money from home, causing a huge mess. The bullies questioned who he was. Hwang Jae-young replied that he was his cousin. The blonde bully threatened Kim Tae-hyun not to meddle in their problems. He put his hand on his head as a way to show superiority, but he didn't show any sign of weakness. On the contrary, he was excited to have the chance to test his powers. The blonde didn't even have time to react to the punch he was about to receive. With one punch, he was knocked to the ground by Kim Tae-hyun, almost losing consciousness from the impact on the ground. Hwang Jae-young and the others were shaken by the situation. He raised his hand, preparing to activate his powers. The blonde put his arms in front to protect himself. He was scared, expecting some firepower to come out of his hand. Kim Tae-hyun was also excited, but the voice in his mind said that the ability to steal skills was currently inaccessible. The blonde looked, wondering why no power came to him, while he was surprised that predation hadn't been activated. A blow came his way while he was distracted. He had been punched by the guy he was holding. He was thrown to the ground by the force of that punch. The blonde ordered the other 2 to attack him. One shot his binding power while the other blew a poisonous breath, and the blonde used his thorn ability. The 3 attacks came towards him. Kim Tae-hyun was surprised by the speed of the attacks. A pressure erupted from the 2nd floor of the house. They watched the purple smoke of the poison. The blonde taunted Kim Tae-hyun with his words, thinking they had won. But then he noticed something in the middle of the smoke. Again, the crimson aura shone, standing out in the smoke. The presence of a hungry predator was forming in Kim Tae-hyun. He complained about his ability coming and going when it wanted instead of when he commanded. The 3 delinquents were still shaken by the sight they were having. He shot forward with his fist covered in stones and hit the blonde's face. He reveled in the oppressive power of his strong ability. A few moments after winning the fight, he looked content at the unconscious bodies of the delinquents on the ground. he discovered that the attribute window was only visible to him. It detailed his abilities, but not everything was informed. The information not mentioned were the activation conditions of the predation ability. Besides that, the passive effect of nullifying other abilities was also not mentioned in the attribute window. He continued thinking and pondering other ideas in his mind. But he put those ideas aside for the moment. He saw his cousin kneeling on the ground, apologizing. Huang Jiayang said he was reflecting on his reckless actions after seeing an impressive side of him. He also said he would be his subordinate and follow any order he gave. While the young man spoke, Kim Tae-hyun thought about what to do with the other incident that happened today. He said he forgave his cousin, and he stood up like a fox. But in exchange for forgiveness, he had to follow him to do something. At an abandoned train station, warning signs were placed in front of the main gate. The three agents looked stunned at something ahead. A portal was about to suffer a break. Portal break is a phenomenon where monsters from the abyss open a path to reality, and if left unchecked, it can lead to something worse than a natural disaster. The agent said the last portal break happened 10 years ago, and that the monsters from this portal were spreading too quickly. The assistant asked if they should start evacuating the neighborhood, but received a negative response from the supervisor, whose ability was called Barrier and his rank was B. By their measurement standards, this portal was rank C, so the strongest monster from this portal was also C. While the agent boasted about his superpower, the monsters forced their way through the barrier and managed to break it. The leader quickly reacted to the monsters behind him. With a kick, he cut off the head of a Cyclops monster. He says that as rank B awakeners, they are more than enough to face the danger of that portal. Huang Jiayang runs after his cousin, questioning if the group of agents mentioned earlier would be okay, since they are quite strong. He continues emphasizing what has already been said as they run to the train station. Kim Tae-hyun responds that although the initial man of the portal is rank C, and the control personnel are rank B, they will have no problems with rank C opponents. Huang Jiayang complains that this is exactly what he was talking about. But Kim Tae-hyun says that this would be true if the portal was really rank C, surprising his cousin. The area around the portal was full of dead monsters. The group leader analyzed the bodies, wondering how those rank C monsters broke his rank B barrier. He turns to face the gate again, realizing that the mana flowing from the portal is stronger than he estimated. Then they see more creatures coming out of the portal. The creatures touch the barrier, already crack it. The three look at the scene without words. The monsters break the barrier and disorient the three with a display of power. They easily exit the portal entrance towards the people. And the huge monster that accomplished this feat was a giant ogre of rank A. The leader is stunned that the portal is not rank C but rank A, and a huge explosion is triggered throughout the station. Huang Jiayang asks his cousin how he knew such information. Kim Tae-hyun had no way to explain it to him, so he responds that it came from his intuition. In front of the two, a crowd of normal people was fleeing from the monsters chasing them. The woman at the front of the crowd said to run because it was a portal break. Huang Jiayang looked perplexed as his cousin had told the truth, and Kim Tae-hyun told him to do what he had asked him to do earlier. He asked his cousin what he would do in that situation. He only responds that he will take care of the monsters himself and then meet them later. The city scene at night is illuminated by the building lights. A man reports on the portal break situation and says it won't be possible to provide reinforcements due to the members' unavailability. He also adds that the only solution to this crisis would be a rank A awakener. So he turns to see the man behind him, a rank A awakener, and asks for his help. He was nicknamed Lunatic Blade on Hyunsu, who told everyone not to worry because he, the hero, was arriving. His greatest specialty was the 8th grade syndrome. Kim Tae-hyun crushes a monster's head. Another he strikes in the jaw, and the third he hits in the chest. All the monsters fall with his combinations of attacks. He activates the predation power, and all the monsters near him are thrown by the wave of power. Kim Tae-hyun looks at the situation, satisfied to have discovered something new. He discovers that the reason for the failure to activate his ability is due to fatigue. If the value exceeds 70%, he can no longer use it. Most abilities use mana as fuel, but that's not all he has to worry about. Fatigue is just as important as mana. It increases if he uses abilities or performs physical activities, and the higher it is, the more the power of the ability decreases and his physique becomes heavy. While Kim Tae-hyun uses predation on the dead monsters, he discovers that he can recover his mana without spending it. Besides recovering his strength, it also increases the ranking of his abilities. He discovers that the more he uses predation, the more it can grow. He dreams of reaching the high ranks of rank as SS or maybe becoming the first SSS. He finishes eliminating the monsters in the area. He looks back, sensing someone's presence. He sees another awakener killing monsters near him, shouting that he will avenge the souls that monster killed. He declares himself a warrior of justice on Hyunsu. Kim Tae-hyun didn't understand that man's actions. With his light sword, he counterattacks the ogre charging at him. In an instant, his sword radiates light. In several quick cuts made on that monster, Kim Tae-hyun is astonished seeing the display of power. Soon he realizes that that man must be the awakener who resolved the portal break before the regression. He stands admiring, and the other boasts, reinforcing the image Kim Tae-hyun had of him. He begins to question why he was there since in the regression the other was fighting in another city. so he begins to pray for the dead souls he found along the way. Before understanding anything, the attribute window informs the presence of an ability. He is startled by the vision he had. Someone comes from behind and stabs his heart. He spits blood without seeing the man behind him, and the assassin laughs for eliminating his target. The city seemed destroyed by the monster commotion, and the atmosphere seems silent in a clothing store. Huang Jian observes the nurse lying down. She appeared to be in a deep sleep. He prepares his mind and heart in front of the nurse while remembering Kim Tae-yeon's words. He hears that many people will die that night, and one of those people is the nurse, surprising him. She was apparently doing relaxing activities instead of evacuating, resulting in her death. With the sleep ability, he could put the nurse to rest and take her to a safe place. Kim Tae-yeon promised he would take care of the rest. He wonders how his cousin knew all this. Then the pieces connect in his mind. He questions it, but all the evidence points to this. He believes that Kim Tae-yeon awakened an ability to foresee the future. He can't help but exclaim how amazing this is in his head. He was sure that nothing would go wrong according to his cousin's prediction. He looks nervously at the scene before him. It seems that the other managed to escape the grasp of the invisible assassin. Pressing the wound to stop the bleeding, he questions who attacked him. The assassin is surprised that he survived even after hitting a vital point, which is to be expected from a Ranke. Han Sang-do gets excited by the challenge. People call awakened ones who commit crimes villains, and the one in front of them was a Rank B awakened. He was also a known maniac who went around killing people during the portal break. But Kim Tae-yeon is sure these two never met in the past life. He wonders if it was because of him that things were different after the regression. An Hyun-soo exclaimed angrily at the villain in front of him. He activates his light sword and charges forward, but the ground makes a strange noise. Below them, there was still a monster that had not been eliminated. The monster uses abilities to attack all three near him, roaring in frustration from anger and pain. The two are surprised by the ogre's regeneration ability as they back away. The creature charges its fist with a lot of power. It launches it, causing great destruction around. The villain decides to let the monster deal with An Hyun-soo. He looks back to see the other prey. He says he didn't expect to have a spectator there. He gets excited and points his daggers at him. Kim Tae-yeon is surprised by the villain's speed. The dagger was inches from his body. Before the dagger could pierce his skin, he defends with his ability. Kim Tae-yeon then kicks the villain away. The villain is surprised to realize that the boy is an awakened one. Kim Tae-yeon reveals that he knows him, calling him a lunatic for killing people with his stealth ability. He says he's happy to have finally found him. The two cross attacks, exchanging fierce blows. Kim Tae-yeon swings his arm to hit the villain's head, but he backs away and blocks with his stone arms. With each impact, the villain's dagger is damaged more. Once again, the two strike simultaneously. The villain compliments Kim Tae-yeon's combat skills and says his ability is quite effective for defense. While they argue, An Hyun-soo is still fighting the giant ogre. He calls Kim Tae-yeon's attention, announcing that he will use his ability. In an instant, the villain disappears from the battlefield. Kim Tae-yeon stays alert, aware of the opponent's stealth. He quickly turns to defend against an attack from behind, but hits only air. Then the villain appears again, and at the last second, Kim Tae-yeon manages to defend with his arm, but is still cut. The attack surprisingly cuts through his stone layer. Han Sang-do, the villain, says he has killed many people with similar abilities. He moves so fast that he leaves residual images around and attacks from all directions. The ridiculous number of attacks makes Kim Tae-yeon retreat. In the last powerful attack, Han Sang-do violently pierces Kim Tae-yeon. Gasping and covered in wounds, Kim Tae-yeon realizes a weakness in his ability that he hadn't recognized before. A very strong shot would crush the stone, and the crushed part would be replaced by another of inferior durability. Han Sang-do had counted on this weakness from the beginning. Despite this, Kim Tae-yeon doesn't lose hope of winning. He loudly wonders if he should end the test he was doing. Han Sang-do thinks Kim Tae-yeon has gone crazy after being hit so many times. Kim Tae-yeon asks the villain if he knows why he wanted so much to find him, confusing him. The same crimson aura as always appears. Kim Tae-yeon reveals that he wanted to steal Han Sang-do's ability. The heavy atmosphere slightly scares the villain, but he isn't afraid. Han Sang-do uses the same tactic of creating afterimages around Kim Tae-yeon. Kim Tae-yeon says he found the weakness in the villain's stealth. He realized this after encountering various monsters. Many monsters escaped his vision, but his ability always caught them. No matter where they hide or where they flee, predation always reaches them. The crimson aura pursues Han Sang-do even when invisible and tears him to pieces. The dawn appears once again. An Hyun-soo is lying on the ground, completely exhausted from the encounter with the villain. He realizes that even a hero of justice like him cannot escape death. The giant ogre is still standing in front of him. The monster delivers a powerful punch forward, aiming to hit the ground where An Hyun-soo is. The ogre waits for the dust to settle to see the blood, but finds nothing he expected. Kim Tae-yeon is surprised to see how worn out the ogre is. He had saved An Hyun-soo from death at the last second. Later that same day, the couple opens the door and is surprised. They see their son and nephew returning home. Tears of joy fill their eyes. They were very worried that monsters had killed them, but their son says nothing happened. Then he says the house was a mess, as if someone had turned everything upside down, and again Hwang Jae-yeon nervously says nothing happened. On the cell phone, the latest news channel was on, alerting that the portal break was completely resolved that morning. But considering a possible subsequent break, schools would be closed for a week. The news of survivors increased using the public. The cleanup team sent to take care of the portal was in the hospital being treated. The school nurse said she suddenly woke up in another place after sleeping. And in the interview with the only awakened present at the scene, he only said that the hero who saved those people was not him, but another unknown person. However, the corpse of the giant ogre was not found, and the identity of the villain who attacked the city has not yet been discovered. People realized that the preventive security measures were not enough. While watching the news, Kim Tae-hyun is glad his name was not mentioned. He stops walking after reaching his final destination of the walk. Now he had 3 abilities, the most recent being stealth. At his current level, it is very difficult to use all 3, because he doesn't have enough mana, and if he uses too much, he will end up getting tired quickly. Then he remembers that the only solution for this is potions. Potions are elixirs created for various purposes, such as recovering mana and fatigue. But potions are very expensive, which is why he was walking in this abandoned area. He planned to hunt, but to hunt, he needed a legal license to use his abilities in public. If he couldn't use his abilities in public, then he could only explore undiscovered dungeons like the one he was in. After crossing the narrow corridor, he encounters huge arthropod creatures and giant spiders. The humanoid creatures showed enough intelligence to speak and mock him. He realizes that the power of these creatures was comparable to rank B, but having a few of them was not enough for him to level up. The Spider Sisters perceive the insult directed at them and begin to attack. They all fill their mouths with venom, and then fire at him in a combined attack. They already sang victory after the combined attack. But the purgation ability nullifies the effects of the venom, leaving him practically unharmed. The 3 are surprised because for the first time a human resisted their venom. The screams in that abandoned railway were intense. The attribute window showed success in stealing the ability to paralyze opponents. The Korean Players Association building was a huge skyscraper. A meeting room was properly guarded by 2 guards. 3 people were sitting waiting in that room. The one sitting in the middle was a new HR manager of the association, Go Tae-wook, and the other 2 were the best players in all of Korea. Player is the word to define an awakened legally allowed to use their abilities for exploring, cleaning dungeons, and so on. Currently, there are only 5 top players in the newly created Players Association. Among all the guilds created, the 4 best guilds were the Indivisible Fighters, the Alchemist Artisans, the Wizard Sorcerers, and the Informant Wanderers. And the agency that controls these 4 guilds and all other players was the Players Association. In front of Go Tae-wook were the Guild Master of the Wanderers, Yu Aeon, and the President of the Players Association, Cheap Chinwei. Both are rank S players. The President asked Yu Aeon if she discovered anything about the Evil Guild. The Evil Guild is a criminal organization formed by the most ruthless criminals among the villains. The recognized members of the Evil Guild always wear golden rings with 3 skulls embedded in them. She hands over some papers with the recent movements of the Evil Guild and a list of their targets. Then she says she knows that wasn't the only reason she was called. And the President immediately asks for her opinion on this case. She, confused, doesn't understand his question. He questions when she took the player test and is told that she did it at the age of 19. Then she understands the meaning of the question. The President smiles in contemplation at her astuteness in noticing that he suspected a high school student faced a rank-a monster. In the spider cave, no monsters were left alive, only Kim Tae-hyun sitting on a pile of corpses. Then he calls one of the 4 major guilds the Alchemists. He asks if he can buy potions while surrounded by magical crystals from all the monsters in the cave. The school closure order ended and the students returned to classes. During the week, Kim Tae-hyun did various activities, from physical training to exploring other undiscovered dungeons and even going to the Alchemists Guild headquarters. At the headquarters, he exchanged all the mana stones for potions and was treated like a VIP client. Additionally, he increased all of his attributes and fortified his abilities to rank C. He rested his face in his hand while the other students watched from a distance. Everyone heard rumors of him beating the bullies and awakening his powers. One of the students thought Kim Tae-hyun's awakening was the smallest of all, and a group of students walked towards the classroom where he was. Kim Tae-hyun noticed their arrival. The chairs were thrown to the floor, creating space. The newcomers grouped in front of him, and their leader put his feet on the table. His name is Lee Jung-gae, and he was rank S. He activated his aura of intimidating power. Lee Jung-gae was the son of the CEO of the Tasa Group conglomerate, the group that sponsors the school. He was the chief of all bullies, abusing his authority and the main culprit for picking on Kim Tae-hyun. Kim Tae-hyun asked him why he called himself a friend and retaliated by showing his aura of power. One of the bullies behind questioned his disrespect, but Lee Jung-gae punched him. The bully was punished for interrupting the conversation. Kim Tae-hyun did not react to the violence in front of him. Then the leader began to release his superpower to intimidate him for disrespect. Kim Tae-hyun was impressed with the level of magic from a rank as Awakener. Discreetly, he prepared his hand in his pocket, wondering how he would react to his purgation. But the 2 were interrupted before they could face off. Lim Aeon ended the discussion and extinguished Lee Jung-gae's fire with her ice abilities, merely warning Kim Tae-hyun not to continue the fight. Lim Aeong had nicknames like Class President, Miss from a Rich Family, Half-Sister of Yu Aeon, Rank as Awakener, among many others, and she might earn more in the future. Her only problem was her inflexible personality. Faced with this, she confronted Lee Jung-gae. He asked what she meant by stop, claiming he was just talking to his friend. She asked why he punched his fallen friend in the face, which infuriated him, and he told her to shut up. So she retorted, telling him to leave or she would use force, while Kim Tae-hyun mentally begged them to stop because their intrigue could cause confusion in the class. The two stared at each other one last time. Then Lee Jung-gae decided to leave first, but he activated his powers and prepared to fire a flame blast at her. However, the school bell rang and everyone stopped to listen to the announcement. The broadcasting club announced that the Players Association would hold a special lecture. All students should gather immediately in the hall, and the announcement was repeated, leaving Lee Jung-gae surprised by the Players Association at the school. He seized his powers and looked at Lim Aeong and Kim Tae-hyun. She was prepared to react, and he just sat there, saying nothing. Lee Jung-gae smiled with excitement and left the room, saying how lucky they were and waited until the door closed to let his guard down. She turned to look at Kim Tae-hyun, but did not find him sitting in the chair as he was at the door leaving the room, and asked if she did not hear the announcement. She turned again, confused by losing sight of his movements, and wondered in her mind if he had always been this way before. Everyone gathered in the main hall and wondered what the lecture would be about. The microphone turned on and the voice of Go Tae-wook, vice manager of the association's HR, spoke. He said they were there for two reasons. The first is the association's lack of response to the portal break and to provide safety training. The second reason was to inform the changes in player tests for students, who are the future of South Korea's new Players Association. Lee Jung-gae silently cursed Kim Tae-hyun. Lim Aeong longed to talk to Kim Tae-hyun later, and he just yawned with sleep in his seat. Everyone wondered about the relationship between the player tests and those who had not yet turned 19. Go Tae-wook revealed a secret due to the portal break and the increasing number of monsters and dungeons. The association was short on staff, so they would be tested even during high school. This revelation shocked everyone. The selected students from each school would be chosen based on grades, academic records, and behavior. But Kim Tae-hyun knew that was a lie. The selection process had already begun. Go Tae-wook had an ability called Observer's Eye. This ability could quantify the total sum of the target's abilities and allowed him to see the attribute window when focusing on the target. He marveled at the numbers of everyone in the hall. He believed the numbers were much better than in other places he had visited, and among these candidates, some stood out in his mind. Lee Jung-gae with 1924 and Lim Aeong with 2335. He recalled that the Wanderers had sent a list of recommendations but couldn't believe there were so many untrained Awakeners. A smile spread across his face. Lee Jung-gae raised his hand, drawing everyone's attention. He was curious about his action. Lee Jung-gae asked if unfit candidates would have to take the test. This piqued the vice manager's curiosity. He explained that player tests were meant to evaluate those suitable to be players among the awakened, and he believed that mere sleepers who hadn't awakened had no right to hear this lecture, clearly referring to Kim Tae-hyun. To become a player, a complex number of abilities should be evaluated. Lee Jung-gae continued his eloquent speech. His goal was clearly to humiliate Kim Tae-hyun, and he managed to elicit laughs from the other students. Kim Tae-hyun realized that Lee Jung-gae was very determined to confirm if he had awakened or not, and he stared back, waiting for proof. Lim Aeong disagreed with his actions, but she remembered Kim Tae-hyun's lack of manners for a moment. This made her hesitate to help him. Then Go Tae-wook said it depended on the student to decide whether to participate or not. He continued provoking Kim Tae-hyun. He knew Lee Jung-gae was right and that he couldn't take the player test if he didn't prove to be awakened. However, he knew the Observer's Eye could be used on him to get a recommendation without doing anything. From afar, Go Tae-wook watched the students. He evaluated Lee Jung-gae's behavior as pathetic for tormenting others. Then his eyes turned to Kim Tae-hyun. The Observer's Eye couldn't verify his information. This realization surprised him greatly. Then Kim Tae-hyun began to challenge Lee Jung-gae. This confused everyone who witnessed the situation. Kim Tae-hyun then said he would lead the lecture and showed the middle finger to Lee Jung-gae. This bold action made Lee Jung-gae furious. Go Tae-wook still couldn't accept that his ability didn't work. Even with the association's president and the Wanderers Guild master, this kind of error had never occurred with his ability. Kim Tae-hyun left the hall, and Go Tae-wook couldn't identify why his ability didn't work on a child like him. A few steps before the door, he stopped. He tried incessantly to use his ability to see him but never succeeded. Kim Tae-hyun turned and allowed his ability to be checked. Go Tae-wook was instantly surprised. A terrifying aura surrounded him, and the power above his head was measured at over 5,000. Sometime later that same day, Kim Tae-hyun was reading numerous books in the library, searching for clues about the king, but was interrupted by the group of bullies he had defeated before. They said Lee Jung-gae was looking for him and that he should get up, and he boldly challenged them, refusing to follow their orders. They were momentarily silent but mentioned his aunt's restaurant. This shook him a bit. He took his eyes off the books and raised his head, and they said the leader sent them to say that. They insulted Kim Tae-hyun, calling him a pathetic orphan who only caused trouble for his uncles. The bully with closed eyes didn't see the attack coming his way, and the library exploded with the pressure of the blow. All the bookshelves were destroyed. The bully was held by the neck with his mouth bleeding. The other two were easily knocked out. Then Kim Tae-hyun simply asked where Lee Jung-bae was so he could find him. In the same main hall after the lecture ended, there was no one in that place. Lee Jung-bae and his bodyguard waited for Kim Tae-hyun to arrive. The bodyguard was slightly surprised. Since Kim Tae-hyun arrived, he had continuously cast negative status abilities. Before the oppressive aura, none of the abilities had an effect. As he suspected, Kim Tae-hyun had awakened and was called for a conversation. But he didn't respond. He continued saying he didn't want to threaten him, but to recruit him. He revealed he planned to create a guild as soon as he graduated. But Kim Tae-hyun still didn't give any response. He said he wanted to recruit other geniuses to work for him. He pointed to Kim Tae-hyun as if expressing recognition of his talent. He ordered him to forget his past grudges and promised to bring fortune and honor to his family and lift them out of the mud. Kim Tae-hyun finally responded, saying how much nonsense he was talking. He activated his ability, preparing for combat. With his stone skin fully formed, he was ready to punch his face. Lee Jung-bae was momentarily disoriented. He quickly recovered and sighed. He remembered that dogs must be trained to obey their superiors and then activated his fire powers. The bodyguard placed his hand on the ground and formed a magic circle. He used an ability to create a room that envelops a space in magic, preventing outsiders from detecting magic from within. The entire floor, walls, and ceiling were coated with magic. He said that now no one would interrupt the fight. The two youths had already started fighting since the room was formed. Kim Tae-hyun, with his stone arm pulled back, prepared to punch. Lee Jung-bae coated his fist with flames. Their blows collided, generating an explosion of energy. The flames were stronger than the stone, shattering it into pieces. He felt pain throughout his arm. He was already preparing to deliver a kick with flames. His kick sent Kim Tae-hyun flying, crashing against the wall. The explosion from the impact and the heat of the flames caused him several internal injuries. Lee Jung-bae enjoyed showing his superiority. The bodyguard just watched the fireworks. He felt pity for the young man facing his young master. Kim Tae-hyun emerged from the flames and charged forward, but the attack was blocked and he immediately prepared to counter. He raised his fire-loaded hand towards Kim Tae-hyun. He unleashed an explosion of fire in his face. The bodyguard continued to observe calmly until he discovered something unprecedented. After the flaming blow, the flames ceased. Quickly, Kim Tae-hyun recovered and retaliated with another stone blow. He began to overpower Lee Jung-bae. The two struck at the same time, but Kim Tae-hyun's fist hit his face first. With the force of the blow, it sent him flying. The bodyguard couldn't believe that the young master was overpowered with brute strength. Lee Jung-bae showed difficulty getting up. He pressed on what Kim Tae-hyun had done to his body that wouldn't move. The bodyguard was surprised to hear that his body wouldn't move. He discovered that physical strengthening wasn't Kim Tae-hyun's only ability. He was thrilled that his paralysis ability worked. The paralysis ability can easily pierce through rank as resistances. Stealth is immediately nullified against long-range fire attacks, and predation as a last resort shouldn't be used lightly. So the goal was to accumulate paralysis through physical combat. He discovered that the status effect of abilities has a greater effect when used in direct attacks rather than at a distance. Therefore, the last damage caused by several attacks containing paralysis could penetrate under the opponent's high rank as resistance. The bodyguard was speechless at the sight of the young master losing. He claimed in his mind that Kim Tae-hyun was a genius, but the fight wasn't over yet. Lee Jung-bae was lying on the ground, suffering from paralysis. He admitted to underestimating too much. Then he pulled a purple crystal from his pocket. He crushed the crystal between his fingers. A fire giant formed in front of Kim Tae-hyun. Lee Jung-bae now said he would fight seriously, with the flames on his body increasing in heat. He propelled himself forward with his flames. The fire titan threw a powerful punch but missed its target by a hair. He let out a shout above the titan's height, with his arms entirely covered in stone as he prepared to punch. But the titan retaliated with a breath of fire. Their attacks collided in the middle of the room. The flames slowly consumed the rock's durability. The stone protection was destroyed, and Kim Tae-hyun was thrown by the explosion's force, crashing hard to the ground. The bodyguard still watched the battle unfold. He recognized that the titan was the true form of the young master's Heart of Fire ability. The purple crystal used earlier was a mana amplification stone created after refining stones found inside monsters. Thanks to the amplifying stone, Lee Jung-bae could use the full power of his ability. The bodyguard worried about other things beyond the use of that stone. He shouted for the young master to stop, or he would end up killing Kim Tae-hyun. He also warned that it was too much power for him to handle, and that his blood vessels could explode from the mana surge. A fire shot was aimed at the bodyguard, exploding where he stood, almost hitting him. He was angry at his subordinate for giving him orders. He said he wouldn't let a piece of shit humiliate him like that. Kim Tae-hyun had barely recovered from the last attack and was immediately struck by the fury of the Fire Titan. He laughed hysterically at the death of Kim Tae-hyun. He ran to stop the young master from going too far and help Kim Tae-hyun. He extended a hand into the hole to help him up but received a punch in the face, sending him far away, spitting blood. Kim Tae-hyun asked what he was saying after he personally started this fight. He drank several restoration potions, preparing to take the combat seriously with his predatory aura. In the building of the Korean Players Association, the vice manager reported in the president's office. He was shocked by the exorbitantly high numbers of 1,900 and 2,300 for the students Lee Jung-dae and Lim A-yang respectively. The vice manager claimed that without a doubt, these two students were Rank's Awakeners. The other agents couldn't believe there was an untrained Rank S with potential comparable to Japan's Saint. The Saint is one of Japan's top players whose power exceeded 2,500 since the first inspection at the age of 19. In this case, she barely exceeded 2,500. The vice manager couldn't help but be astonished when he remembered Kim Tae-hyun's value of 5096. He wondered if it was an evaluation error or an error in his ability. He left the president's office with other agents and set out to find Kim Tae-hyun again to confirm his doubts firsthand. The bodyguard had a disbelieving look, doubting if what his eyes saw was correct. The predatory ability was suppressing the powerful Fire Titan. He tried to break free, not understanding how Kim Tae-hyun was doing this. He couldn't believe he was being overpowered by someone he considered weaker. He shouted that he was in hair and a powerful rank S. Kim Tae-hyun asked what it mattered if he was in hair or what his rank was, exerting a bit more power in his ability. The king's power took shape above the decaying scarlet vines. They devoured Lee Jung-dae's Titan form, and the entire court was destroyed in reaction to the power. The entire gym was destroyed. Lee Jung-dae was unconscious on the ground. The bodyguard trembled intensely. Kim Tae-hyun watched ahead with surprise. The bodyguard had protected the young master by throwing himself in front at the last moment to pull him from the attack during the predation. Fortunately, he acquired the ability in time. He asked what he planned to do and how he would handle the consequences. Kim Tae-hyun questioned how he could act brazenly after getting involved in the fight. He stated he wasn't the type of man who would flee from such a threat. He denied having a plan to kill Lee Jung-dae, but insisted that he deserved fair compensation for his life. The bodyguard's face turned pale upon hearing Kim Tae-hyun suggesting that 1 billion won would be enough to keep the hair Lee Jung-dae alive. Outside the gym, several students gathered around the explosion. While everyone wondered if they were villains, Lim A-yang recognized whose flames those were. She furrowed her brows with Lee Jung-dae's name in mind. Then the scene of Kim Tae-hyun being bullied flashed through her mind. The nurse tried to calm all the students, but Lim A-yang ran ahead of everyone towards the gym. The nurse was surprised to see her running. She was a few meters from the door, regretting having just watched those two in the gym without doing anything. She entered without fear, running through the flames. She wished in her mind that Kim Tae-hyun hadn't died in the explosion. Then she saw the previous scene unfold completely differently in her mind. She had no reaction while he talked to her. She questioned him about what he did to defeat Lee Jung-dae, but Kim Tae-hyun, not wanting to explain, lied, saying he fell down the stairs. The lie couldn't be more obvious, and Kim Tae-hyun asked her to handle it alone without telling others what she saw. He hurriedly left the place, and Lim A-yang ordered him to tell what really happened. But when she turned towards him, he was no longer there. She didn't understand how he could have disappeared so quickly. Kim Tae-hyun reappeared far from the gym. He said Lim A-yang would handle the situation for him and that the Taisen group had already taken part in his reward. He turned to look at his status. A new ability and a new attribute were added to his window. The Charm attribute with 5 points, and the ability Monarch's Heart capable of strengthening his group members. He felt slightly irritated to have acquired an attribute from celebrities like Lee Jung-dae, but was happy to have gained the ability. He remembered that abilities that strengthened the group were rare. For someone like him who uses various abilities, the Monarch's Heart was very useful as it combined with any other ability. While rejoicing in his achievements, a group of black cars appeared in front of him. The figure who got out of the car said he was pleased to meet him. The vice manager said he had many questions for him. Kim Tae-hyun wondered how he had ended up where he was at that exact moment. At Lee Jung-dae's father's mansion, he was informed that his first and only son was in the hospital, and that the aggressor was demanding 1 billion won for his son's life. His hunting dogs barked fiercely. The bodyguard trembled with fear in front of his boss. He apologized and said he had nothing to say about it. The boss told him to do whatever Kim Tae-hyun asked, surprising his subordinate. Mockingly, he said that Kim Tae-hyun was a brave kid. He raised his right hand from the armrest of the chair. He snapped his fingers, signaling for his other subordinates to enter. The bodyguard recognized the people who entered. He shouted to his boss to remember that the opponent was still a child and that he was being too cruel. The boss told him to shut up and said he wouldn't tolerate a dog barking. Lee Jung-soo smiled cruelly at his subordinates in front of him. At the moment when the vice manager asked what he did in the gym, Kim Tae-hyun wondered which of the two events he was referring to. He pondered about the chances of the manager getting involved in the problem he had with Lee Jung-dae. With few options, he tried to rely on luck and asked if he was talking about the explosion. The vice manager was surprised by the question about the explosion. Then he looked back and said he would take care of that another time. Kim Tae-hyun confirmed that the vice manager didn't know about his involvement in the gym explosion. A smile appeared on his face, and he asked if they didn't already know what he did. After leaving him confused, Kim Tae-hyun said he knew he came there to invite him to take the player test. trying not to make it clear which theory he based this on. Then Kim Tae-hyun revealed his aura. The number 5214 appeared above his head. He replied that it was because of this great number displayed on him. The vice manager was astonished, unable to believe what his eyes were seeing. After seeing the numbers on his head increase, he was sure that Kim Tae-hyun's strength was real. Then he asked Kim Tae-hyun another question, asking what happened to his clothes. Kim Tae-hyun finally noticed the damage to his clothes. At Kim Tae-hyun's house, his cousin was shouting very loudly. Hwang Jae-young asked to confirm if he was really going to take the player test, which Kim Tae-hyun confirmed. With his cousin's confirmation, his jaw dropped. Then he knelt before the great Kim Tae-hyun. He said the Taesin group would solve the gym problem and that he could just focus on training for the player test in a month. His phone rang on the table. Outside his house, 2 people were waiting. These 2 were wondering why the association was protecting the house of a mere student. The masked man had just defeated the association agent while the black masked one watched the house. These 2 were a 2-person assassination unit, the Black and White brothers. The elder used the codename Black and his abilities were stealth and physical enhancement. The younger used the codename White and his ability was only stealth. The black masked one laughed on the roof, planning the death of the mere student. He turned to look at his brother but was left speechless when he saw him being beaten. He quickly drew his hidden blade, asking who was hitting his brother. Kim Tae-hyun let go of the white masked villain. The black masked one had no time to react. He received a full knee strike from the one who was supposed to be his target. A few hours earlier in the gym, the bodyguard said he couldn't make the decision to keep the event quiet and to hand over 1 billion won alone. Kim Tae-hyun said he wasn't evil enough to throw that duty on the minions and asked him to get a good deal with his boss. Then he conjured a contract in the palm of his hand. The promise of the awakened, a contract created by magic, and breaking it would result in a random permanent penalty. The first condition of the contract was, besides providing 1 billion won, he also had to fix the gym incident. Live on the news, it was reported that the cause of the gym incident at the school was a gas leak, fulfilling the first part of the agreement. The second condition was to inform him in advance of any revenge actions against him. The black masked one quickly launched an attack with his blade, something that was easily dodged by Kim Tae-hyun. He prepared his left hand and delivered a powerful punch forward. The black masked one dodged upwards and prepared to counterattack. He attacked from behind but couldn't hit his target. He couldn't believe he missed that attack. From behind him, Kim Tae-hyun mocked the weakness of the assassins sent to kill him, saying they were nothing but their stealth abilities. On the street, a big black car was giving a ride to Yoo Ae-young. She called the president, asking about the player test. She asked the president who will be observing her participation if it's Shin Yun-bak from Busan, a rank S. On the other end of the phone line, the president denies Yoo Ae-young's speculations. He said that Shin Yun-bak is a good candidate, but he is more interested in her sister, Lim A-young. She says she doesn't appreciate the president's jokes. Then the president asks her who she is interested in. Yoo Ae-young says it was Shin Yun-bak, but another candidate caught her attention. She replies that the vice manager Go Tae-wook personally cornered a rank S. Kim Tae-hyun had already exterminated the 2 black and white masked assassins. Then he looks at his hand and realizes once again that he is having trouble using his predation power. The attribute window says that he is unable to use predation due to his physical incapacity. On the streets in front of Kim Tae-hyun's house, the black and white masked assassins were exposed on the street. Agents of the vice manager Go Tae-wook complained about the horrible conduct of attacking high school children by the assassins. Go Tae-wook thanks Kim Tae-hyun and asks if he knows who paid them to assassinate him. Surprised by the question, he decides not to tell, saying he doesn't know anything. Go Tae-wook wonders if the participant list was leaked. Kim Tae-hyun thinks it could be a problem if the Taesin group knows too much about him, but he thinks they are the least of his problems now. He tries to exert control over his ability, but unfortunately, his physical capacity is insufficient to use it. He starts walking back home while thinking about how to increase his status to be able to use predation again. Purgating monsters or awakened ones are flawed methods because they require using the ability. After pondering for a few moments, he realizes there's only one way. The next day at Blackhead Academy, the personal trainer Yura welcomes the new visitors to the academy, the training center of South Korea's new association. After introducing herself, she notices that the 2 are children. She starts to say that this place is not for children, but Kim Tae-hyun pulls out a black and gold card. Yura stares at the VIP card in his hand. She recognizes it as a card from the Alchemist's Guild. She wonders about the identity of this boy who came to her today, worried about causing a problem if something goes wrong. A muscular figure appears to save Yura. The muscular man says that money is not enough to get in. This man was the Iron Man, not officially a player, but an awakened rank B. Hwang Jae-young, confused by the situation, asks what they were going to do now. Meanwhile, a small group of bodybuilders watched the situation. The Iron Man, killer of rookies, had found his new prey. The muscular man continued posing. Kim Tae-hyun couldn't understand anything he was saying and commented that he was barking like a dog. This comment caught his attention. Hwang Jae-young and Yura were shocked at how rude he was being. He asks Kim Tae-hyun if he was calling him weak. He responds by asking if he wants to settle it with a bet the loser pays for a year of the winner's membership. He laughs complacently at the challenge he imposed and accepts. Immediately, both are teleported to a virtual game field. Everyone in the academy watched the unfolding scene excitedly. Huang Jiayang asks what that game simulating the abyss was. Yer responds that it is a game program called the Virtual Portal. In the Virtual Portal, there is an exact replica of the abyss, and that is where the competition begins. The objective was to reach the finish line carrying the most weight in the shortest time possible while eliminating rank B monsters along the way. This game was the most common way to establish a hierarchy in this academy. The Iron Man starts bravely advancing. He charges at various creatures. His muscle enhancement ability gave him immense advantage in combat against the creatures and also improved his mobility, and allowed him to carry a large amount of weight within the virtual world. Suddenly, he sees a light shining beside him. It was Kim Tae-hyun's advance, overtaking him in an instant. 3 monsters appeared to intercept him, but his mere advance was enough to pass through them. He prepares a powerful kick, and the monsters can't react. They can only watch him easily eliminate them. He kicks upwards and easily eliminates a group of monsters along the way. In his descent, he eliminates those he passed by. The virtual monsters can only see him arrive before they die. He sees the massive amount of points Kim Tae-hyun is scoring ahead of him. He is extremely shocked by this sight. Everyone else in the academy is also shocked. Only Huang Jiayang is cheering for him. He turns his gaze to the Iron Man and thanks him for paying for a year's membership for him. Time passes, and today is the day the player tests begin. Everyone was anxiously waiting for this opportunity. A journalist observed from a helicopter looking at all the candidates. The ones people were most eager to see were Iron Fist Hong Jung-wook, the druid Lee Gilson, the god of thunder Shin Yunbak, and the next saint Lim Ah-young. Besides these, many other talents were expected to participate this time. Many others were also interested in watching the show. A young reporter was exhausted from the distance she had to travel. She was saddened because if she didn't cover this story, she would be fired. After seeing the immense number of people who came to see this exam, she didn't think she would be able to interview any of the awakened who would take the test. While she lamented lying on the ground, Kim Tae-hyun approached from behind the crowd. He wondered why there were so many people, and his voice caught the attention of reporter Kim Gi-ja. She quickly assumed Kim Tae-hyun might be a candidate. She sneaked behind him, asking if he would let her do an interview. A view from above showed the entire stadium. In the waiting room, Kim Tae-hyun was called minutes before the test began, almost late due to the interview he gave. He entered the closed room and found hundreds of people inside. Everyone was waiting for the test to begin. The closed walls made it hard to know the time. Some people's attention was drawn in one direction. Lim Ah-young noticed a recognized person from afar. Kim Tae-hyun realized that she was also here for the test. The two greeted each other, and his increase in height didn't go unnoticed. She asked what he did with his body, and he replied it was just training. She stared at him again, wondering how he had changed so much in a month. Before she could ask what he did in the gym with Lee Jung-bae, her voice was interrupted. Suddenly, many screens turned on, showing silhouettes of the same person. The host said that the first test would begin and that he would give the rules. The first rule is that everyone has a plate on their chest with a number on it. The objective of the first test is to collect 5 plates, and if you don't protect your own plate, you will be disqualified. He said the time limit is only 1 hour. The entire white room began to move and reshape. He finally finished by saying that all means and accessories could be used except for murder. Then he announced the start of the first test. Everyone was in random places in the completely random-shaped room. Everyone charged at Lim Ah-young because she was rank S. She charged for powers in her palm. All the evaluators saw the great glacier she created. They were impressed with the talent of the next saint, but didn't forget to praise the high caliber of the other participants. Among all, one evaluator said he was particularly interested in one candidate on the screen beside. Shin Yunbak, the rank S, hadn't let anyone approach him from the start. Most evaluators wonder how the clash between these two rank S powers would be while Go Tae-wook watched a specific candidate alone. He understood the interest to rank S, but he knew the real star of today and was confident that Kim Tae-hyun would stand out a lot. He looked energetically at his screen, but he saw him fighting only one candidate in a balanced way. Go Tae-wook couldn't believe his eyes. He couldn't help but exclaim loudly his irritation. The awakened rank Hong Jung-wook received a punch to his ironclad face. Kim Tae-hyun received back the blow he gave with his stone skin. Believing he had misjudged his abilities, Go Tae-wook could only watch in disbelief through the screen. Then he realized he hadn't dodged any attack. Kim Tae-hyun and Hong Jung-wook advanced towards each other to continue their duel. He deliberately threw himself in front of the Iron Fist. The force of the blow easily broke his rocks. Hong Jung-wook shouted at Kim Tae-hyun, thinking he was underestimating him. He said that Kim Tae-hyun's ability was completely inferior to his own and that he hadn't even bothered to dodge. Then a terrifying aura filled the air. Kim Tae-hyun felt his stats increasing during the duel. He charged forward with inhuman speed. He continued to receive external stimuli to tone his body. For him, fighting to the limit was just training, and he kept giving and taking blows. He put all the strength of his arm into one punch. In the collision of the attacks, Kim Tae-hyun emerged victorious, breaking the opponent's iron skin. He looked very pleased with his results. Hong Jung-wook could only faint in the face of the powerful opponent's strength. He fell on his back to the ground without the slightest reserve of strength. Kim Tae-hyun stood looking over him. Go Tae-wook, who was watching the duel, couldn't help but be happy with his victory. He shouted alone in the room while the other evaluators looked at him strangely. But he worries that he might use too much stamina employing this method throughout the entire test. He starts to think that the best tactic would be to conserve his energy by targeting the weaker ones first. Then a shot catches him off guard when he sees on the screen. All the other evaluators see a rank C awakened acting irresponsibly. Obviously, they were talking about Kim Tae-hyun, who was walking towards Shin Yun-bak after having eliminated dozens of people. They comment on his body covered in plates, saying he might be considered the strongest in the test. Kim Tae-hyun starts to count how many plates he has with him. But he stops because as long as he has more than 5 plates, it's enough. An electric aura erupts from the powerful competitor throughout the arena. The already immense aura further increased the release of his power. Kim Tae-hyun dodges an electric discharge. Shin Yun-bak is delighted to see his enemy's speed. From the beginning of the test, he thought everyone was too weak to entertain him, with the only exception being Lim A-yang, who is of the same rank as him. Shin Yun-bak concentrates his discharges once again to attack. All 3 attacks were skillfully avoided by Kim Tae-hyun. He prepares with his stone skin on his foot. He's going to kick towards Shin Yun-bak. The kick is immediately defended by electricity. Even Kim Tae-hyun was surprised by his defensive power, but Shin Yun-bak praises him for being so fast that he couldn't see his attacks. The power erupts for him again, sending Kim Tae-hyun away from him. He is perplexed by how treacherous the God of Thunder is, possessing an ability capable of controlling lightning, and a massive defense that allows him to stand still while attacking both at a distance and up close. His destructive power is not something to be underestimated by anyone. Kim Tae-hyun focuses on thinking of a plan that doesn't use predation, which is currently unavailable to break through his impenetrable defense. Shin Yun-bak sees that he isn't coming to him, so he asks if he wants him to advance as well. He is astonished to see him running so fast towards him. He charges an enormous amount of lightning into his hand for the attack. He narrowly dodges by turning his neck to the right. Then a charged kick is delivered but is also successfully avoided. Hands charged with energy head towards him again. Numerous successive attacks from Shin Yun-bak were made, even destroying the arena. He was having a lot of fun with the excitement of that battle. Then he grabs Kim Tae-hyun's hands and discharges all his lightning into him. He is paralyzed by the immense energy running through his body. Shin Yun-bak shouts that he should be running if he wanted to withstand fighting him. Kim Tae-hyun grits his teeth and ignores the pain of the electric current passing through his body. He puts everything into making his stone arm grow, but the electric power breaks all the stones immediately. At the same time, it produces a blinding light. Kim Tae-hyun raises his arms to cover his eyes, but Shin Yun-bak jumps to deliver his next electrifying attack with full force on him. His hand descends, and a massive lightning bolt quickly strikes Kim Tae-hyun. The attack completely destroys the surrounding area. He could barely withstand the discharge of thousands of volts. Shin Yun-bak praises him for withstanding even this amount of energy release. He thinks in his mind that he is very happy to see a new toy so fun in this test. In Shin Yun-bak's moment of distraction, a rock comes flying towards him, hitting his forehead and snapping his head back. He is stunned by the blow to the head. Quickly, Kim Tae-hyun runs to his back and throws another rock at him, this time hitting his chest with force and precision, making even Shin Yun-bak cough up blood. Stone Skin is not comparable to the God of Thunder's ability. Even at its best performance, it would end up shattered by his blows. But the test field is different. It is built of a material that can withstand the power of a first-class awakened, so it won't lose its shape even if it ends up cracking. So Kim Tae-hyun's plan was to use the broken stones, small or large, he found along the way to attack Shin Yun-bak, until he can overcome his enemy's supreme defense. Then he uses the large stone to strike with all his strength. He is built from a material capable of withstanding the power of a first-class awakened, so it won't lose its shape even if it ends up cracking. Thus, Kim Tae-hyun's plan was to use small or large broken stones he found along the way to attack Shin Yun-bak, until he could overcome his enemy's supreme defense. Then he uses the large stone to strike with all his strength. With this act, he destroys a good portion of the arena. With the boy's defeat, the audience wonders how rank S could lose to a rank C and who Kim Tae-hyun might be. Having defeated the boy, he collects the last pieces needed for the tournament, and now he only has to wait for the test to end. While distracted, he is hit by a surprise ice attack. Looking in the direction the spell was cast, he notices another spell of the same type, only larger, directly above him. At this moment, a girl named Lim A-yang appears right in front of him. Seeing the girl so close, he feels confused and wonders why she was there and how long she had been watching them fight. However, as she approaches the protagonist, the girl says she believes that great power comes with great responsibility. For power without responsibility is merely violence, and she comments that Kim is very strong but never imagined he would defeat Shin Yun-bak in that manner, and that he probably defeated Lee Jung-ji in the same way. Soon after, the girl exudes a chilling aura, her eyes glowing with a pale color. as she uses her powers to cause massive destruction aimed at the protagonist. In response, the protagonist remarks that the girl's snow resembled a bomb, making stealth or anything of the sort entirely useless. The girl then manages to strike him with an excellent blow. At that moment, she says that back in the gym, she believed in him, and that she thought he was different from other kids like Lee Jung-jae, that he wouldn't act recklessly, driven solely by his self-interest. But after seeing him fight, she realized that in the end, it was all his fault. She then continuously strikes him with extremely powerful blows, leaving the protagonist in a tough situation. Afterwards, she states that the unauthorized use of abilities is a crime and that those two boys are still in the hospital. However, after everything he went through, she decides not to report him, but he must withdraw from the player tests. She declares that he doesn't deserve to be a player. In turn, the protagonist gets up and asks her who she thinks she is to say all that, because she wasn't even able to put an end to Lee Jung-jae's tyranny. And even after saying all of that, all she really wants is to eliminate him. He then says he would have preferred her to use survival in the test as an excuse instead of being so pathetic. Those words make the girl's facial expression change completely. She, in turn, declares that in that case, she won't go easy on him anymore. Next, she uses her power to create a massive ice staff and says she will eliminate him with it. At this moment, the protagonist realizes that after being shattered thousands of times, his stone skin has lost its functionality. Even if he uses stealth, he'll be detected by her area attacks. And the attribute boost granted by the Monarch's heart is already active, but isn't enough to turn the tide. However, purgation is still sealed, and to make matters worse, he has no stamina to paralyze her as he did with Lee Jung-jae. So in the end, he only has one chance left to win. The battle between the two continues, causing massive destruction in the arena. Amid the brilliant light emanating from the arena, the entire audience wonders what is happening, as they can't see anything at all. However, as the arena's light begins to dim, everyone is shocked by the scene they witness. The scene they see is the protagonist and the girl on the ground locked in a kiss. But it wasn't just a kiss. In reality, it was a paralysis ability. Status effect abilities that cause abnormal conditions at close range instead of long distance. And whether directly or indirectly, they have an extremely high chance of success. The protagonist infused paralysis into his blood and made her swallow it. But considering that a rank S possesses monstrous resistance, this was just a provocation. Nonetheless, the girl couldn't resist and became completely paralyzed. Then the protagonist's system notifies him that he caused immense psychological shock to his opponent. As a result, his charm increases by 3. At this moment, the announcer declares that the first round of the tests has finally ended, and that the medical team will move everyone to a safe place, so they ask all participants to remain in their positions. After the first round of tests was completed, all injured participants were promptly attended to by the medical team. However, even though Lim Ah-young was paralyzed, she still possessed her test blacks and was competent in combat, thus passing the first round. As for the protagonist, despite only managing to collect 7 plaques, he unexpectedly defeated Shin Yeon-bak and Lim Ah-young. This made him the center of attention in the tests at that moment. Thus, all the participants who saw him began to wonder about his rank, those he defeated, and even the tricks he might have used. Moments later, he analyzed his healed body, thinking that the healing abilities were great since he couldn't even walk in his previous state. Shortly after, Shin Yeon-bak arrived, eager for a rematch against the protagonist. He told the protagonist that this time he wouldn't be able to use the same tricks he used inside the arena. As the rematch began, the young man released a massive amount of aura. As the fight started, several other players began watching, with one commenting that Shin Yeon-bak was trying to get revenge for the previous fight. Meanwhile, another young man said he didn't care if Shin eliminated a candidate, but he should go all out and crush the protagonist. However, Shin became extremely irritated with them and told them they had nothing to do with this battle and should stay silent. Then Shin Yeon-bak declared he would show him that he was nothing without cheap tricks in a clean and fair fight. However, before the fight could start, everyone present, including the two of them, began to be pressed to the ground due to gravity magic. The man who cast his power started to approach, and as he did, he asked if the boys weren't going to let others rest. He added that they acted as if they didn't know their place. This man was the S-rank player Park Sung-jin, one of the best players in the New Korea Association and a future S-rank player. At this moment, the protagonist attempted to stand up despite the gravity, which left the man impressed as someone was still standing. However, he intensified his gravity magic, ensuring the protagonist couldn't rise under such pressure. The protagonist then thought he had heard that the abilities of an S-ranked awakened and an S-ranked player were on entirely different levels, but he hadn't expected it to be this different. Meanwhile, player Park asked if he was withstanding all that pressure, noting that even veteran players couldn't endure so much. Before he could increase the pressure further, he was interrupted by the doctors responsible for the players. One of the doctors demanded to know what the hell he was doing to the kids who had just been treated, and whether he was trying to eliminate them all before the second round began. However, Park claimed he wasn't trying to eliminate them, but rather to control the situation. The doctor then accused him of lying, stating he knew Park did this every year to test the players' abilities. Meanwhile, Unlike the other players who were completely unconscious due to Park's pressure, the protagonist managed to stand, leaving the man astonished. Impressed with the protagonist, Park asked for his name, to which he responded that he was Kim Tae-yeon. Park then thought to himself that Kim must be the C-rank player who defeated Shin Yunbak and Lim, and noted it had been a long time since someone had piqued his interest this much. Placing his hands on the protagonist's shoulder, he said it was clear he aimed to become an S-rank player and asked if that was correct. He added that he would be waiting for him and then left the area. However, the doctors began chasing after him, asking where he thought he was going after causing such a scene. Moments later, the players who advanced to the second round all found themselves in a forest, where the S-rank player Park was also present. He asked if everyone was ready after a brief rest, and then announced that they would begin the second round of the player license test. The final test was behind the portal they were about to enter. This portal led to a D-ranked dungeon, and he announced that every 5 participants who reached the dungeon through the portal would be allowed to explore it with him as their supervisor. They would be evaluated on all their actions during the dungeon exploration. Any necessary items, such as weapons or supplies, would be provided by the association. The protagonist thought to himself that the second round being a dungeon made sense, especially for an inexperienced amateur. There shouldn't be any problems, as it's a rank D dungeon. Besides, active players will be with them. Unless it's a double dungeon called Apocalypse. Inside a rank D dungeon at the player testing site, the world's first double dungeon was discovered. This led thousands of people to shake hands with God, including the first group to discover it. This triggered dungeon breaks in countless undiscovered dungeons, so he thinks it would be great if he could stop this with a simple warning. However, no one would believe his words without any proof, and even if they did, it might end up suspecting him. That would be embarrassing, but he'll have to deal with his own problems as long as he's not part of the first discovery group. He can find various ways to survive. Upon entering the dungeon, he realizes that he's now part of the exact group he didn't want to be in. Then the protagonist's group supervisor asks if everyone is ready. The supervisor for the second round of tests is an A-rank player, Medohak, the first person to discover the Apocalypse double dungeon. With a serious expression, the protagonist thinks he's in deep trouble. As they explore the dungeon, they encounter monsters but manage to defeat them with ease. The group's inspector applauds them for showing remarkable combat intuition, even though it's their first real battle. He says they definitely have what it takes to become players. At this moment, a girl in the group says it was nothing, as it was all possible thanks to his instructions as a player. While observing them, the protagonist wonders why, out of all the teams, he ended up with the first discovery team. And he has no doubts about it. The ring Medohak is wearing is the only item the first discoverer of the double dungeon was using. That is the Sage's Ring, a unique rank item that increases strength, stamina, speed, and mana by tenfold. At this moment, he thinks that the Apocalypse dungeon is definitely rank S. And if he falls into it, he won't have a chance to survive in his current state with predation sealed. But it doesn't matter. He must ensure his group doesn't find the Apocalypse. While walking through the dungeon, they end up in a place with 2 different paths. One of the group members asks the inspector what they should do in this situation. The inspector explains that this happens often in dungeons, so they should first consider a majority vote. However, the protagonist suddenly runs in one of the directions. Terrified, the inspector yells at him to come back, saying running like that in a dungeon is extremely dangerous. While running, Kim says it's fine and that they should follow that path. He then thinks about why he would let them decide this on their own. Clearly, he wasn't going to let that happen, because he would make them take a path different from the one chosen in his regression, something better than letting them find the Apocalypse. His plan is working. His entire group is following him. However, a portal with purple and pink hues appears right in front of him. Since they are inside a dungeon, the boy wonders how another portal could exist. The protagonist realizes that he has stumbled upon the double dungeon portal. All of his effort to keep his group from reaching it was completely in vain. To make matters worse, a member suggests they check what's inside the other portal. However, the protagonist commands everyone to stop right there and asks if they can't tell just by looking. After all, another portal different from the dungeon entrance is strange, no matter how you look at it. He insists they need to report this unusual incident before doing anything else and asks Medohak if he agrees. Medohak replies that it's indeed his first time seeing something like this and that by the rules, reporting it to HQ would be the right thing to do. However, he suggests they try it just this once. He says he understands what the protagonist means, but the mana he feels inside the portal, unlike its appearance, doesn't seem dangerous. Besides, it's just a rank D dungeon. Even if something happens, he, as an A-rank player, is present. He concludes that either the association prepared this portal or it's an extremely rare occurrence. Therefore, exploring this dungeon will earn them good points in the test. At this moment, the protagonist asks if Medohak has lost his mind as he isn't acting according to the rules. However, Medohak questions whether someone who doesn't even know how to work as a team should be saying that. Hearing these words from their inspector, the entire group turns against the protagonist's idea. After all, just moments ago, he was running carefree through the dungeon. Ignoring all the danger, one of the boys in the group said that even if the protagonist was a little skilled, he shouldn't forget his place. Another boy remarked that he couldn't believe the protagonist was talking back to an active player, calling him arrogant. Since most of them decided to side with the inspector, they chose to enter this other portal. In an attempt to stop them from entering, the protagonist said he needed to speak to the inspector. However, with a snap of his fingers, the inspector filled the entire area with light. Upon entering the dungeon, the group noticed something strange and suspected that this was actually an S-ranked dungeon. At the end of the corridor, they spotted a giant, terrifying statue holding an enormous sword. The group began questioning the inspector, asking what was going on and whether he was sure this was a D-ranked dungeon. At that moment, the protagonist told everyone to be silent and instructed them to only look ahead. Hearing this, one of the group members commented that the protagonist was still being rude. However, the protagonist replied that something was coming. As soon as he said that, two statues appeared in the area, ranked Death Knights. This left the group wondering how they ended up in such a place, and the frightened inspector told everyone to prepare for battle. The inspector and the two statues then engaged in an intense fight. Using his power, the inspector seemed to be holding his own against the two statues. At that point, the entire group joined the battle alongside the inspector. They strategized to block the monster's vision, shield the front lines, and keep attacking without giving the enemy any space. After managing to defeat the monsters, a girl in the group said they were safe now and admitted she hadn't expected them to be able to defeat ranked monsters. One of the boys celebrated prematurely, claiming it wasn't a big deal and that he could do it again. But as he gloated, more statues began to appear behind him, not just two, but four this time. With the appearance of these additional statues, the group became extremely frightened. Meanwhile, the protagonist analyzed the statues' bodies and realized something was very wrong with this place. Moments later, the fight continued, but the number of statues had increased significantly. The inspector then noticed that every time they defeated one statue, dozens more would appear. Furthermore, all the group members were already at their limits, and at this rate, they would all meet their end. Kim then informed the inspector that something very strange was happening in this dungeon. Looking at the protagonist, the inspector wondered who he truly was. Even after all the fighting, the protagonist showed no signs of fatigue and had been the first to sense the portal's danger. If not for the boosted attributes from the protagonist's ability, the monarch's heart, it wouldn't have stood a chance. The inspector questioned whether the protagonist was really just a C-ranked awakened. In shock, he asked Kim what he meant by something being wrong. The protagonist replied that it was just a hunch, but those monsters weren't Death Knights. These words filled the group with despair, leaving them to wonder what they had been fighting all this time in the dungeon. At that moment, the protagonist picked up a sword one of the monsters had been carrying and declared that he would find out right then. He then charged toward the statues with full force. However, he ignored all the smaller statues and headed straight for the largest one. His attempt was successful, and he quickly destroyed the largest statue. Upon its destruction, the entire dungeon's scenery changed completely. The protagonist then revealed that it had all been an illusionary trap. It was a tactic designed to drain the energy of intruders by showing them a false environment and imaginary enemies. One group member, frustrated, exclaimed if all their hard work had been for a mere illusion. A girl also asked if this meant worse monsters were about to appear. The inspector, still perplexed, asked how the protagonist had known it was all a trap. After all, he couldn't have ever fought a Death Knight either. The protagonist replied that even though he didn't know much about it, there was no way the enemies could have been that weak. These words left the inspector completely unsettled. However, the protagonist said they should keep moving before they ended up becoming a memory. Even after the illusion disappeared, things didn't improve. Following the manifestation of the apocalypse, the dungeon's space was completely transformed. The wounds sustained during the illusionary battle worsened gradually, but they couldn't afford to wait for help. Stoich's only hope is to find the exit of this dungeon. After walking for a while, they finally come across a portal. Despite finding the portal, the masked boy asks if it might be dangerous. Facing him, the inspector responds that it could be, but if they don't open it, they'll just die there anyway. So he ends up opening the portal, only to be confronted by a Death Knight. Seeing the monster, the boy laughs at the sight of just one enemy. However, as the room becomes more illuminated, more of these monsters appear, filling the space. This leaves the group utterly terrified, prompting one of the members to ask if all these monsters are Death Knights. At that moment, the dungeon leader appears, laughing and declaring that inferior humans have managed to reach this place. He then orders them to start fighting. This monster is the Lord of the Death Knights and is rank S. At this moment, the statues in the room begin moving toward the group, though they don't attack immediately. Analyzing the monsters, the protagonist deduces that they seem to want one-on-one duels. Terrified, one of the boys says he can't fight anymore since he has no mana left. In turn, the protagonist tells everyone to calm down because their goal is not to fight but to escape. After saying this, the group starts fleeing in desperation, except for Meadowhack and the girl, who remains unconscious on the protagonist's shoulders. As they run, the boys exclaim that they'd rather go back to where they first appeared and that they don't want to die here. But at that moment, a statue swings its sword, hitting all three of those trying to flee. Witnessing this dangerous attack, the protagonist declares that he'll buy them time and that Meadowhack should find a way to escape. However, Meadowhack pushes the protagonist and the girl behind him, using his power to create a wall to protect them. At this moment, Kim asks what he's doing, but Meadowhack orders him to stay silent. He calls Kim a useless non-awakened and says he should know his place and stop acting so full of himself. He then mentions that when he was younger, he wanted to become an S-rank player. But no matter how much he trained and improved his abilities, he was always far from achieving that level, growing more distant from his goal with each passing day. This was his chance. If he could handle this particular situation, maybe he'd start being treated like an S-rank. But in the end, this is how it turned out. At that instant, a statue charges at him, but Megdohak easily handles it. After defeating the statue, he says that Kim is different, and that infuriates him. But he also admits that Kim has the talent for it. That's why Kim should take the injured and flee as far as possible. As their supervisor, fighting the statues is his duty. However, when the protagonist looks at the injured, he realizes they are no longer alive. Moments later, the wall created by Megdohak is completely destroyed, and Megdohak is utterly defeated, losing his life in the process. The statue that took Megdohak's life raises its sword toward the protagonist, challenging him to a duel. Cornered in this situation, he looks down and spots the ring Megdohak was wearing. At that instant, the statue attacks him, but he manages to dodge and grabs the man's ring. As he runs, he places the ring on his finger, thinking this is his only chance to make it out alive. He then commands the ring to awaken, causing a small explosion of energy that destroys the statues attempting to kill him. At this moment, the dungeon boss is shocked, wondering what kind of power this could be. By putting on the ring, all the conditions for its use were fulfilled, unsealing predation. Additionally, all his attributes increased by 10 each. The protagonist then unleashes a significant amount of destruction with his mana, hurling his enemies away. However, while fighting, he realizes that purgation takes an average of 10 seconds to fully devour. So he knows he can't rely solely on this ability. He decides to use all the attributes he's accumulated and all the skills he's gathered so far. Only then will he be able to escape this dungeon alive. At this moment, he notices a massive spear radiating energy and wonders what it might be. But with a single gesture from the dungeon boss, all the statues hurl spears at the protagonist. With great effort, he manages to dodge all the spears and the statues attacking him. He then finds himself face to face with the dungeon boss and of course attempts to do something. However, the boss uses an ability to launch the protagonist far away. He then says that while the protagonist was quite strong, that was his limit. With that, the protagonist was completely overpowered by his strength. With his sword and feet pressing down on the protagonist, the boss said there was still one last thing he wanted to ask. He then asked who had given the protagonist this power, but the protagonist began screaming in agony and pain. At that moment, his player system informed him that a mysterious power was resisting the roar of the Night King, and part of this resistance had succeeded. The dungeon boss then mentioned that he already knew the protagonist, unlike normal humans, could understand his language. He asked again about the nature of this power. At this moment, the scene changed slightly, and in front of the protagonist appeared a massive figure of a monster with long horns and 4 arms. Looking to his side, the protagonist noticed the bodies of his fallen group members. Behind him stood the dungeon boss. Meanwhile, he thought that nothing looked the same as before. He began to wonder what exactly this ability called predation was and how he, a mere human, started to understand the languages of monsters. He realized he had been entirely ignorant of everything, only gaining this power and a chance. And yet nothing seemed to have changed for him. At that moment, the boss launched a dangerous, fatal attack. Even faced with such danger, Kim wondered why the king had given him this power. He then heard a voice saying that the reason had already been told to him. A man without clothes appeared under a light and said it was simply because he had been moved by Kim's determination and tenacity. The man also told him that he didn't mean to change, but simply move forward. Apparently, all of this was a dream. However, when Kim opened his eyes, they were reddened, and he bore an expression of anger. The dungeon boss, seeing this, commented that the protagonist seemed to have no strength left to answer him. He then called Kim a pathetic human and declared this would be his end, preparing to deliver the final blow. But before the attack landed, the protagonist managed to react using a strange power that destroyed several statues in an instant. Seeing the protagonist's response, the boss became excited and asked if Kim was trying to go into a frenzy with this ability in his current condition. At that moment, Kim began increasing his mana by 1. Completely thrilled by the fight, the boss declared it was excellent to see Kim's final effort and that he would entertain him until the very end. The boss then charged at the protagonist with a strike, making his sword exude mana with tremendous force. Thinking he had struck the protagonist, the boss realized the powerful attack had no effect as Kim easily stopped it. Kim then asked if the boss was curious about the true nature of this power. As the boss expressed his desire to know more, the protagonist told him to find out for himself. As his strength and power increased, Kim's system notified him that he had just advanced to rank B. Kim then delivered such a powerful blow that the boss was sent flying. Afterward, Kim continued defeating the other statues with overwhelming strength. Realizing he was close to defeat, the boss questioned how an inferior human like Kim dared to achieve all this. The boss attempted to use an ability to trap the protagonist, but it failed entirely. At this moment, the protagonist declared that his power was not that of a human, It was the power of the king. Finally, Kim launched a crushing attack that the boss likely would not survive. With this victory, his system notified him again that he had acquired a new ability. The registered ability was called the Spirit of the Night King. Moments later, several hunters gathered in front of the portal to analyze it. Player Park then asked a woman what the magical reading of the portal was. She responded that it was an S-ranked portal. She added that an evacuation order had already been issued, but the distortion inside the dungeon was causing delays in the withdrawal. As a result, she wasn't sure if a support squad would arrive before the dungeon break occurred. Player Park thought to himself that at this rate, everyone inside the dungeon would be doomed. Thus, he decided he would have to intervene alone to ensure their survival. The portal then began emanating an even greater energy, leading them to believe the dungeon break was already happening. For safety, Player Park told everyone to prepare for the worst-case scenario. However, from inside the portal, only the protagonist emerged. Kim said it was close, but he had managed to return from the dungeon. Thanks to the protagonist, the dungeon incident was resolved, and the test participants were able to evacuate without significant issues. The results of this round were decided based on the evaluations from before the second round of the exam. Additionally, the corpses were recovered and returned intact to the families of the deceased. It was decided not to reveal who cleared the Apocalypse dungeon. Moments later, the director speaks with two hunters, one being Park and the other unidentified, mentioning that they had to endure retaliation from the corporation. However, if they told the truth, it was obvious the protagonist would become a target of the press and villains. With those words, the two players understand the situation, and the director thanks them for their comprehension. He then asks what they thought about the protagonist who cleared the S-rank Apocalypse dungeon. In response, Player Park states that if the protagonist managed to clear an S-rank Apocalypse dungeon alone, he must at least be on the level of an S-rank player. However, the other player says that since his current rank is lower than S-rank, it's difficult to estimate his true power. Hearing this, the director asks what they mean by those words, and the two players begin to exchange glances. At that moment, one of them replies that there's a high chance he is at the level of national power. Back to the protagonist, he finds himself in a place with a completely red sky, surrounded by several extremely powerful monsters. Seeing this scene, he wonders how he ended up in the abyss. Moments later, the king appears in the sky above. Upon his appearance, the monsters attempt to attack him, but with a single motion, he reduces them all to dust. The king then declares that he will be waiting for the protagonist in the deepest corners of the abyss. After that, the protagonist wakes up in a hospital bed, where he was admitted due to all the injuries he sustained in the S-rank dungeon. Upon waking, he wonders if it was a dream, but realizes it couldn't have been, as it felt too real to be just a dream. He also reflects on what the king meant by waiting for him. He notices his predation ability, a skill even S-rank monsters are aware of, as well as his understanding of the monster language. This leaves him with even more questions. He concludes that becoming stronger and going to the abyss is the only way forward. After this, he checks his player statistics and finds them exactly as he suspected. He had a feeling while facing the Lord of the Death Knights, but he truly has advanced to rank B, and with these attributes, he can rival an S-rank player and the Spirit of the Night King. After all, he is certain that predation is the skill that once crushed him with overwhelming force. At this pace of growth, it won't take long before he reaches the level of national power. Through the doors of his hospital room, it seems someone is trying to enter. However, the guards refuse to let them through, prompting the visitor to complain that it's outrageous they won't let her visit a sick person. Even as the president of the association, she calls this behavior truly wicked. She bursts through the door, asking the protagonist if he doesn't agree with her. Looking down, he notices that everyone who tried to stop her from entering is completely unconscious. After asking the protagonist if he agrees with her, she surprisingly calls him dear. Moments later, inside a car, a young man suggests to the guild master that it would be better if he drove instead. However, the woman replies that it won't be necessary since the protagonist is her guest and she should handle it. The protagonist then asks what the guild master of the Wanderers, one of the 4 great guilds, might want with him. The woman responds that she's just taking him home after his hospital discharge while also checking out the one who survived the apocalypse. At this, Kim sarcastically remarks that if her reason was that trivial, she should have at least come up with a more plausible lie. The woman laughs and admits he's quite clever. She then asks if he knows what will happen in the 3rd round of the player tests. The 3rd round will be a survival game similar to the 1st round, but this time outsiders will be able to watch as part of the audience. Because of this, his abilities will be fully exposed to the public. All the guilds will undoubtedly start vying for the low-ranked Awaken, who managed to clear an S-rank dungeon. She asks to make him an offer he cannot refuse before that happens. Whether it's money or fame, she's willing to give him anything he desires to join the Wanderers Guild. After that request, the car fell into complete silence, creating a hostile atmosphere. After thinking over the offer, the protagonist simply declined despite it being a great opportunity. The woman hadn't expected this response and was left in shock. Moments later, the protagonist, along with the other 2, the guildmaster and another young man, stopped in an alley. The protagonist thanked them for the ride, but said he would walk the rest of the way. The guildmaster in turn asked why he had refused the offer and whether he had even listened to her proposal. After all, whether it was money or anything else he desired, she was willing to make it happen for him. She then asked if he had declined because he had received an offer from another guild, or if he had misunderstood something by mistake. Kim responded, saying she shouldn't take it the wrong way as he had no specific reason for declining. He had no other guild or conditions, and then asked if the Wanderers Guild was really that special. In the end, he said he refused simply because he didn't want to, and with that, he announced he was leaving. But as he descended the steps of the alley, before he could react, the woman grabbed him from behind and covered his mouth. With an intimidating aura, she asked what his deal was. She pointed out that he was just starting as a player, yet he dared to reject one of the 4 major guilds without any specific reason, which didn't make sense to her. She then removed her hand from his mouth and said she would forgive him for refusing the offer. Moreover, she admitted to having a certain interest in him. At that moment, the young man accompanying them said that the protagonist was still in testing, so he questioned what she was doing with him. He also told Kim not to reject the guild master's offer without reason and insisted that he should accept it. After all, Kim would have to join a guild sooner or later. The protagonist then noticed the woman's stubbornness was exactly the same as expected. After all, it made sense considering she was the sister of Lim A-young. The woman was shocked and asked how he knew about her relationship with the person mentioned. Kim simply replied that he knew a lot of things, including her stolen name. Realizing that the protagonist knew about this, she released a massive amount of mana, so strong to reach the sky. At this moment, her assistant thought the situation was dire. The guildmaster Yu A-young's real name was Lim A-young, and the CEO of the Yuksun group, Lim Chang-yon, had raised her an illegitimate child as an heir. However, when another daughter was born within the family, her name was taken from her, and she was reduced to an outsider. The fact that she had changed her surname upon becoming a player was something only a few people should have known. With her hands around the protagonist's neck, she asked how he dared to spout such nonsense in her presence and if he was missing a few screws. The protagonist replied that she was the one who had started it. At that moment, his system notified him that a mysterious force had successfully resisted the spirit of the Amazon. Kim then grabbed her arm and used his energy. Once again, his system informed him that he had successfully countered using the spirit of the Night King. With just his energy, he flung the woman backward. Stunned, she wondered what kind of power he was displaying. Kim thought to himself that as if resisting the powers of an S-rank player wasn't enough, he had also reversed them. He then climbed the steps toward her, pinning her against the wall. Staring at her, he warned her not to cross that line, and for a moment, the woman blushed slightly. Her assistant, feeling awkward, wondered if Kim had actually said those words. Days later, during the 3rd round, the presenter announced to the public that the 3rd phase of the tests would take place in the Colosseum, ancient Rome. Unlike the 1st and 2nd rounds, which had not been revealed to the public, the 3rd round would allow spectators. People from the industry, participants' families, and even civilians were present in the arena as the audience for the tests. Among the civilians was Yu A-young, disguised as a regular citizen to watch the tests, still blushing because of the protagonist. Among them was also the protagonist's father, who said that thanks to Kim, they could experience something like this. His mother, however, asked if everything would be okay, as she had heard that player tests were extremely challenging. At that moment, a young man told her not to worry about it because Kim was incredibly strong. He added that Kim could defeat all the players with a single strike. This young man, fully confident in the protagonist's abilities, is Huang Jiang, his cousin and also the president of the protagonist's fan club. Shortly after, a woman who overheard them in the stands thinks she needs to land a headline this time. Her name is Kim Gija, a rookie reporter working for SSY Economics, and she's on the verge of being fired. For a moment, she recalls her last interview, which was discarded because it was with the low-ranking Awakened. She also considers the possibility that the protagonist might have been disqualified from the tests, and with tears in her eyes, she knows she could lose her job if she doesn't land a good interview. At that moment, another young man in the stands asks a woman if the atmosphere doesn't seem a bit strange. Hearing the man's words, the journalist notices that countless high-ranking Awakened, veterans, and even Lee Gilson, a promising A-rank candidate for the player test, are all staring at one person. This makes her wonder if they're all planning to team up to take down the protagonist, her target, and also just how strong the protagonist could be. Shortly after, the beginning of the 3rd round of the player test is announced. The audience is cautioned to be careful of impacts while watching. Then the host declares the start of the test. The group begins preparing their enchantments. They charge toward the boy, saying they must get rid of him immediately. They claim he alone has defeated 2 S ranks since the 1st round. Because of this, if they don't eliminate him first, he'll probably defeat them all. Soon after, the young man appears in the midst of the attacks, landing a punch on each of them. An explosion occurs and several people fall unconscious. The protagonist, in turn, observes everything in silence. Shortly after, he notices something strange as a spell hits him. Confused, the boy asks what that was. An unknown man comments that while he may have defeated 2 S ranks, letting his guard down was a mistake. For this reason, he would be the winner of the test. However, within seconds, the protagonist defeats Lee. As a consequence, he suffers significant damage. Coldly, the boy asks for the next person to attack him. The entire group begins targeting the boy, believing that sustained attacks will tire him out eventually. Shortly after, Kim points his finger at the group and summons the spirit of the Night King. An intense light appears and a giant monster materializes above the boy. The monster observes everyone around as some of them begin to collapse. The other groups, seeing this situation, become extremely desperate. The people in the stands watch everything in silence. A boy comments that he shouldn't have used that ability in the center. The scene shifts upward, showing several bodies on the ground. Kim, in turn, feels relieved as he has finally ended it. Now there's only one thing left to do. Shortly after, a girl with blue hair appears on the scene. She seems injured from the previous boy's attacks. Kim asks what Lin intends to do, as it doesn't matter to him if she withdraws from the test at this point. She could still choose to repeat the first round. Lin then begins casting her ice magic, forming a giant sphere around the arena. As a result, she traps the protagonist inside it. Lin comments that Kim should worry about himself because this time, what happened before won't happen again. With a cold stare, Kim asks if she's really sure about that. Some time passes during the battle, and the girl is ultimately defeated, collapsing unconscious to the ground. The protagonist remarks that it was expected of her because despite her demeanor, she was still the most challenging opponent. The host then announces that with this, the player tests have concluded and the protagonist is the highest qualifier of the tests. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the president presenting the rewards to the boy. He congratulates him on becoming an S-rank player. Furthermore, he didn't expect him to end the third round single-handedly. Kim says that all of it was just luck. Hearing this, the man remains silent. He then calls the boy again, asking if he would like to join the South Korean Player Association. Kim, hearing this, is very surprised. The man asks him again what he wants. Kim reflects on how much has changed as a sleeper like him became an S rank and even the highest qualifier in the test. He even received an offer not just from a leader, but from one of the greatest guilds, which is also the largest association in New Korea. For this reason, the more he thinks he understands this world, the less he knows what might happen next. However, there was still something he wished to do. As a result, he ended up refusing the offer, believing that instead of being a member of the 4 major guilds of the association, it was better to work alone. For that reason, he wanted to apologize for not being of help to the man. Hearing what the protagonist said, the man was surprised. He began laughing heartily, saying he had never imagined that Kim would claim to be better off alone, rather than with the great guilds or the association. This showed that the young man truly had a high level of confidence. Because of this, the man suggested he should try something else instead of joining the association. He asked if Kim might be interested in participating in the Asian Exhibition Games. Sometime later, the scene shifted to the protagonist inside a dungeon, surrounded by numerous monsters. However, they were all defeated easily. Kim felt relieved that another dungeon had been cleared. He then recalled what the man had said about the Asian Exhibition Games. It was a festival where associations or guilds from each Asian country selected 5 representatives. These representatives would hunt monsters and compete against one another. However, to be chosen, one needed a track record of achievements that showed the monsters they had defeated. A flashback appeared, showing the man saying that given the protagonist's pace, he believed it would be a great option for him. Kim thought that talking was easy because he had only just become a player. To reach the level of merit that others had taken years to build, you would need to hunt monsters in much stronger dungeons. Yet despite clearing all the dungeons that had appeared in Korea over the past month, not only did he fail to accumulate significant merit, but he also didn't grow as he had hoped. As expected, it was all extremely dangerous. Even so, there was no other choice but to go to that place. The scene then shifted to a mansion, where a glass seemed to be falling in slow motion. At the same time, a man appeared to be strangled by someone. The man begged the president to calm down. The enraged man shouted that the Herr Detesa was still in the hospital, and while the culprit had done that, he was walking free at that moment. He asked how he was supposed to calm down under such circumstances. Moments later, the man collapsed unconscious to the floor. At that instant, a girl appeared, saying there was a visitor from the malicious guild. The man questioned why they still hadn't dealt with the protagonist after all the money he had given them. He declared that he would handle it himself, but he was startled when an intimidating aura surrounded the door. An unknown man appeared, apologizing for his son, but insisting it was better to calm down. He asked if Tessa's goal was really to waste time on that kid. Introducing himself, the man said he was the vice master of the malicious guild. He was known as Shadow. The scene then shifted to a portal in another location. Meanwhile, someone seemed to be coming out of it. Shortly after, a man called out to him as he stood in front of a door. The man addressed him as a ranked player and said the alchemists were ready to assist with the auction. He introduced himself as Park and said it was an honor to meet him. He asked if he could possibly get the protagonist's autograph as his performance in the third test had been sensational. Park explained that this was Asia's most prestigious auction district. It held the largest and most magnificent auctions in Asia, offering unparalleled quality items. The district even supported features like automatic translation abilities. Among its many qualities, East Point stood out for numerous reasons. However, what truly caught everyone's attention and was considered its pinnacle was its security. Bodyguards, such as those present at the auctions, always play a crucial role. However, The teleportation points constantly changed, and it was impossible to reach the area without authorization. Because of this, there had been no security issues for decades. Observing the situation, the protagonist thought the title of the best security system was well deserved. However, on that very day, a terrorist attack by an S-rank villain would occur there. Sometime later, an announcer proclaimed that the moment had finally arrived. The auction's most coveted prize was about to be awarded. It was a potion that, with just one sip, could increase one's health by 20 points. Meanwhile, who was observing everything from above? It was the protagonist, thinking that all he needed now was to wait for the terrorist. Killing an S-ranked villain would allow him to accumulate more merit. However, the lack of information was still a significant issue. All he knew before returning was that East Point had suffered brutal losses and that the head of the terrorist attack was an S-ranked villain named Narendra. For this reason, he wanted to know who had stopped that man. At that moment, the security guard appeared. Kim, in turn, asks who was in charge of security at that location. The security guard questions why he wants to know, and the protagonist responds that it's just out of curiosity. At that moment, the announcer starts speaking again. He mentions that several S-rank players are present at the location, and they appear to be heading toward a specific area, where they end up encountering the protagonist. An unknown man asks if, by any chance, his name is Kim. The security guard says the man is an S-rank player from Japan and the chief responsible for security at that location. For this reason, Kim should be extremely cautious around him. The guard explains that he is known as the demon among players, notorious for betraying even his own partners when it suits him. Greeting the boy, the man says he heard that Kim is an unprecedented genius from New Korea. For this reason, he never expected to meet the boy at that location. Observing the situation, Kim is surprised because the man is greeting him with his left hand. Immediately after, Kim returns the handshake in the same manner. However, he feels something unusual when their hands touch. It seems like he receives an electric shock. The man is surprised and says he can't believe Kim endured that. For this reason, Kim must truly be an S-rank player. At that instant, something strange happens. The people around them begin collapsing to the ground. Kim thinks that if they fought there, civilians could end up getting involved. The man comments that it seems he went a bit too hard on the rookie, who just became an S-rank. Shortly after, he releases the protagonist's hand and steps closer to him. He says not all S-ranks are the same and that, while he doesn't know why Kim is there, he should stop any nonsense and stay in his place. As he walks away, he tells the boy to enjoy the rest of the auction. Watching everything, Kim remains silent, thinking this situation is more complicated than he expected. The scene then cuts to another building. A group of people appears to be heading toward another group. Someone asks who these people are and how they managed to get inside. An older man replies that it doesn't matter how they got in since there's only one portal control room in the building, and if they've reached that area, they're targets to be eliminated. He adds that the task should be left to him because an A-rank player can handle it easily. Time passes. The scene shifts to a monster defeating several people. The older man seems to have been defeated as well, and an unknown man observes him with a menacing gaze. Soon after, more people arrive, and a man comments that there was a setback at the auction. He mentions that the S-rank player from Korea is present at the location and asks what should be done. Nero wonders if that man really thinks he can do whatever he wants, even with him there. For this reason, no one will escape his divine judgment. The scene then cuts back to another location. At that moment, the building explodes. Apparently, the auction inside it is also engulfed in flames. It's revealed that the protagonist is also at the location, and the explosion seems to have hit him. In a matter of seconds, all the buildings appear to be on fire. Returning to the security guard, he asks if the protagonist is okay. He says they need to evacuate immediately. Kim thinks that it doesn't make sense because he knew there would be an attack, but he didn't expect explosions everywhere. Because of this, he wonders how the villains infiltrated and how the bombs were planted. However, he decides to set that aside as there's something more important. Looking ahead, he notices a man holding a weapon and taking people hostage. The man threatens that anyone who resists will get a bullet to the head. In seconds, the man is easily defeated by the protagonist. The security guard, observing this, is astonished. Kim instructs the guard to notify the association about the situation and request reinforcements, because he's going to personally go after whoever is responsible for this chaos. The scene then shifts back to the other location. A man says that these are auction items, not for thieves like them. Shortly after, the unknown man orders everyone to be defeated. A battle ensues with several people already dead. The man eventually opens a chest. Apparently, he finds what he was looking for. It turns out to be an item from the earlier auction. The man thinks he understands why Nero went to such lengths for that potion, even risking his life. Just by looking, one could sense the immense power, and for that reason, he was contemplating the case if he used it. At that very moment, another explosion occurred. One of his companions was thrown back. The man, on the other hand, had no idea what was happening. One of his subordinates mentioned that an enemy was nearby. Another subordinate remarked that the enemy's appearance seemed familiar. However, in the next instant, that subordinate was defeated. Then the other two in front of him met the same fate. The man, surprised, thought that the ability must be stealth. Yet within seconds, he too was attacked. Even so, it wasn't enough to take him down. As a result, he activated his chain ability, successfully trapping the protagonist within it. Calling the boy an idiot, he asked if he thought he could just turn invisible and act freely. For that, he would die right then and there. The protagonist, surprised, remarked that the ability could even track invisible enemies. Because of this, he thought it might be worth devouring it. The scene then shifted to another location. The hostages in that place were terrified. An incredible number of monsters were in the area watching them. This was the teleportation portal's control room. Above them all, Nero declared that everything was going as planned. And with this, everyone would fear the existence of that god even more. All that remained now was the Phoenix Potion, and at that moment, a subordinate appeared. He reported news of the group that had gone after the potion. For this reason, there was still an issue to resolve. The subordinate handed over a communication device. On the other end, someone asked if the person he was speaking to was Nero. Nero, on the other side of the line, asked who was speaking. The protagonist responded that he was the one who had stolen Nero's belongings. He added that if Nero wanted them back, he'd have to come get them in person. Calling Nero a piece of trash terrorist, he left the man completely enraged. Kim then drank the potion, and as a result, his strength and magic increased significantly. At that moment, he mentioned hearing that the potion was of unique rank, something truly extraordinary. His attributes had skyrocketed in the blink of an eye, something he had never experienced in a dungeon before. And by drinking the potion, he no longer needed to worry about it falling into enemy hands. Moments later, a group of individuals arrived at a location where several players had already been defeated. One of them mentioned that another man was supposed to be there according to his last signal, so he wondered if he might have fled. The head of security, however, laughed and asked what they were talking about, noting that the man they were searching for was right in front of them. He then told the protagonist to stop hiding and reveal himself. The protagonist appeared, remarking that it was strange since his invisibility was supposed to be flawless. The man then asked why someone of Kim's S rank would be in that place. Kim, in turn, asked if the man wasn't the head of security and whether he shouldn't be trying to stop the terrorists. Laughing again, the head of security replied that he was after a special item. Hearing this, Kim laughed and said he had suspected something was off. After all, despite the heavy security presence, no one had found the bombs. He also noted that they had infiltrated the East Point, a place impossible to enter without authorization. For this reason, he had suspected a traitor, but hadn't expected it to be the head of security himself. The head of security replied that he had warned the protagonist to stay out of it, then lunged at him. However, the protagonist easily defended against his attack. During the fight, a man demanded that Kim hand over the item. Kim replied that if he was truly a villain, he should try to take it by force. The battle intensified with debris flying everywhere. Frightened by the fight, one of the observers told the group that this was a battle between two S ranks, so they shouldn't even think about interfering. Moreover, Ryohei, the head of security, was known as the Demon, and if they were careless, they'd end up dead. During the fight, the protagonist noticed that unlike himself, who relied on sound and intuition, the man could see him even with his techniques. Eventually, despite his invisibility, Kim was struck by a fatal blow. He reflected on the immense gap in their abilities, but it was still not the time to resort to the devouring technique. Then he uses an ability that lifts all of his enemies into the air as if using gravity magic. When they reach a considerable height, he slams them back down with immense gravitational force, causing devastating damage to them. After throwing everyone to the ground, the protagonist searches for the whereabouts of the head of security. However, he doesn't find the man among the others. A voice from the shadows comments that it was a good decision, but invisibility is useless against area attacks. It adds that if he wanted to find him, he should have also protected his own head. At that moment, the head of security charges at the protagonist with overwhelming force and a radiant aura. The impact he creates makes it seem like he has defeated the protagonist. However, as he stands over the protagonist, he realizes that chains are wrapped not only around the protagonist, but also his sword. The protagonist coldly remarks that, in the end, the man truly is a fool. This unnerves the head of security, making him realize that the protagonist's previous ability wasn't meant to find him, but to prevent him from escaping his reach. While using his chain powers, the protagonist asks where he thinks he's going. He then hurls his chains at him, pulling him back and striking him with an incredibly powerful punch. With this, the head of security and his henchmen are completely captured by the protagonist. Shortly after, Kim demands an explanation for why an S-rank player would become a criminal for money. The head of security angrily tells him to shut up, saying that if it weren't for Kim's interference, he'd probably be enjoying his success right now. The protagonist interrupts him with an extremely powerful kick to the face, telling him that his tongue is too loose for a petty criminal. The kick is so forceful that it sends the head of security flying. Kim then instructs him to deliver a message to Narendra Nehru. He must tell him that requests for support must already be flooding the associations of every country. Kim then asks if he's aware that with the reinforcements arriving, both he and Narendra Nehru are going to meet their downfall. The head of security, utterly defeated, begins to laugh. He says that, as expected, the protagonist is nothing more than a rookie who knows absolutely nothing. These words leave the protagonist momentarily stunned. The scene shifts to an older man with white hair and a short beard running toward a room. Upon arriving, he asks how the reinforcements for the eastern wing of the building are progressing. This man is Si Sengyek, the guild master of the Alchemists, one of the 4 major S-rank guilds. He also mentions that besides the auction items belonging to his guild, there are numerous VIPs from New Korea, and at this rate, everyone will end up in the hands of the terrorists. One of the people in the room tells Siu Sang-yik to calm down. He explains that as soon as they heard about the terrorist attack, they organized a support team. Park Sung-jin is leading the team, and he emphasizes that it is an elite squad. Siu Sang-yik then asks why they haven't departed yet and says that if it's an issue of personnel or materials, his guild can handle it. However, the man explains that the problem isn't resources, but the lack of a way to reach the location. At this, Sang-yik asks what he means, and the man explains that the terrorists have taken control of the portal room in the eastern wing. This means they've locked all access portals, but he reassures that the situation is under control. After all, there are 2 S-rank players on site, Kim Tae-gyun, who just became an S-rank, and on the terrorists' side, only Narendra Nehru. Until the portal is reestablished, the 2 players should be able to handle the situation and might even defeat Narendra Nehru. At that moment, a woman enters the room. Upon hearing these words, she responds that such confidence might be valid if the opponent were any ordinary S-rank. This woman is none other than Yu Aeong, a renowned player. Back to the protagonist, the terrorist asks if he's ever heard of the skill Demon's Pact. Kim, however, seems to have no idea what this ability is. The terrorist explains that it's Narendra Nehru's most terrifying skill. It allows him to sacrifice offerings and, depending on their quality, summon demons of equivalent strength. Curious, the protagonist wonders what kind of offerings these might be. Thus, the terrorist asks what else Kim would sacrifice, if not people. Meanwhile, Yu and the others were discussing Narendra Nehru's abilities. Upon learning about his abilities, the men in the room were completely shocked. The man mentioned that at least hundreds of hostages were in Narendra Nehru's hands. An elder added that Nehru was known as one of the most powerful among S-rank players. If he used hundreds of people as sacrifices to summon demons, it would be a massive disaster. At the same time, the protagonist was beating up the head of security. Taking blows from the protagonist, the man began to laugh, saying that Kim might have been lucky so far. But against Narendra Nehru, he wouldn't stand a chance. He then asked if the protagonist would kneel and beg for his life while watching the hostages be sacrificed, or if he would face a fight with no chance of victory and meet his end. In the room with the hostages and other terrorists, a subordinate informed Nehru that Isaka Ryohei, along with the protagonist who defeated Ryohei and took the Phoenix Potion, had disappeared without a trace. Nehru asked what they should do in such circumstances. He then stated that, as it would be impossible to confront them directly, the protagonist was likely waiting for support from the association. At that moment, Nehru used his power to sacrifice 2 hostages, declaring that if Kim didn't show up, they would simply need to drag him out. He also announced that the festival in the name of the gods should begin. But before he could harm the hostages further, the room suddenly became pitch black. His subordinates questioned why this was happening now, even though the bomb had detonated some time ago. Even in total darkness, Nehru noticed that the captured hostages had vanished in the blink of an eye, which could mean only one thing. Shortly after, the protagonist appeared behind Nehru with his magical chains. Using his chains, Kim landed a hit on Nehru. Believing he had won, Kim celebrated prematurely, thinking he had captured him. But from the folds of Nehru's head, several snakes appeared to counterattack. These snakes, imbued with fire abilities, caused a massive explosion to protect their master. Despite the explosion, the protagonist managed to evade it. Observing the situation, Kim wondered what kind of madness it was to hide monsters inside one's own head. Near the hostages, one of them asked if he was player Kim and if he had come to save them. Terrified, the hostages begged for help, saying that these monsters had appeared out of nowhere. Another hostage promised a reward if the protagonist saved them. However, Kim told them they were getting in the way and used his chains to fling them to safety. Immediately after, several of the villain's monsters charged at Kim. They seemed to land a powerful hit, but Kim emerged unscathed. Using his previously cast magic, Kim attempted to press the monsters to the ground, but had no effect on them. Even with his abilities, the monsters managed to move and counterattack, leaving Kim shocked. As the monsters swarmed toward the protagonist, Nero laughed and called him Knave. He explained that the creatures born from his demonic pact were entirely different from the monsters Kim had faced so far. Thanks to his pact with the demon, Nero had total control over all the monsters he created. His power made them much more resistant and far stronger than ordinary creatures. He also remarked that just because Kim had defeated the head of security, he shouldn't think he could challenge the gods. Meanwhile, the hostages noticed that the protagonist was being completely overwhelmed. One hostage remarked that Kim had ignored their cries for help, done whatever he wanted, and still couldn't defeat a single monster. Hearing this, another hostage defended Kim, telling them to pay closer attention. Pointing to the fight, he explained that because of the protagonist, the monsters weren't even looking at them. Despite being under immense pressure, Kim hadn't run away, and he hadn't allowed any of the monsters to approach the hostages. Even the hostages who had been flung into the air had been evacuated to a safe location far from the fight. With tears streaming down his face, an elderly man declared that from the beginning, the protagonist had been trying to save their lives and they hadn't realized it. Moved by his words, all the hostages began to shed tears and started cheering for the protagonist. The protagonist begins using his chains to fend off the monsters. Angrily, he says that enough is enough. They should all shut up and stop bothering him. Hearing this, everyone in the room is outraged by what they just heard. The protagonist then comments that the hostages are only getting in the way and that these monsters seem endless. He adds that it's so disgusting he can barely stand it. Hearing these words from the protagonist, the hostages appear angry at his remarks. Meanwhile, Neru bursts into laughter and asks if the protagonist has already admitted defeat. At that moment, the protagonist calls out for player Park Jianwon, who has again appeared to end this mess. Shortly after, Jianwon enters the room, prompting the terrorist leader to question his identity and how long he has been there. Entering the room, Jianwon apologizes to the protagonist for the delay and declares that the real fight is about to begin. Moments earlier, after Kim defeated the traitors, he told Jianwon that the escort squad was actually aligned with the terrorists. Jianwon asked if all of this had happened while he was still outside. Kim replied that his current concerns lay elsewhere. He explained that the portal control room was likely infested with monsters. If it were just the monsters, it wouldn't be too problematic, but the monsters wouldn't just stand by idly. More importantly, the hostages might get caught up in the fight. That's why he needed Jianwon's portal manipulation ability. Jianwon hesitated, saying he'd like to help but couldn't locate the exact point, which made accessing the association impossible. Hearing this, the protagonist assured him it wasn't a problem. All he needed was one thing: to get rid of all the monsters in the room. Back in the present, Jianwon opens portals in the room, sucking the monsters into them. Watching this scene, Neru becomes visibly stressed and demands to know what's going on. Jianwon reflects on how insane this plan sounded when he first heard it, but now he can't believe Kim made it work. With the plan succeeding, Jianwon realizes only the terrorists remain and thinks victory is within reach. However, Kim shouts his name, telling him his role here is done. He should take the hostages and leave the area. Hearing this, Jianwon appears reluctant, saying he wants to stay and fight alongside him. But the protagonist insists, explaining that his opponent is now an S-rank player. From here on out, he won't be able to protect anyone during the fight. While Jianwon evacuates the hostages, the protagonist and Neru prepare for their final battle. The battle begins with Neru using explosive snakes to attack. However, Kim manages to evade the explosions. Dodging the attacks, Neru starts using the rocks in the area to strike at the protagonist. As he relentlessly attacks Kim, Neru asks if he really thinks he's an S-rank. He mocks Kim, questioning whether a kid like him could possibly stop him. Neru then lands a fire-based snake attack on the protagonist, sending him crashing to the ground. Afterward, Neru declares that it doesn't matter how many monsters Kim defeats or how many hostages he saves. If he can't defeat Neru, all of his efforts will have been in vain. While Kim lies on the ground, Neru calls him a filthy heretic. As punishment for defiling God's name, Neru says Kim must pay with his life and orders his remaining monsters to attack him. Just as the attack is about to hit, the protagonist starts laughing and asks what all the shouting is about. Still lying down, Kim tells Neru that he's the one who's about to meet God. At that moment, the protagonist unleashes all the energy he had been suppressing during the fight. This leaves Neru completely stunned, wondering if Kim had been hiding all this power the entire time. Laughing at the protagonist, Neru admits that Kim might actually be a first-rate sacrifice. But he adds that Kim isn't the only one with tricks up his sleeve. Kim hears coughing noises and looks around, noticing 3 of Neru's henchmen in bad shape. One by one, the 3 begin to disintegrate. Neru recites the words to complete a ritual sacrifice using the lives of his henchmen. As a result, an S-rank skeletal dragon with a green aura materializes. Meanwhile, Jianwon is battling other henchmen to keep the hostages alive. One henchman asks what's up with these people, while another suggests they must have escaped from an upper floor. Thus, the man said that since they had escaped from above, there would be no problem in taking their lives. But before they could do anything to harm the hostages, their lives were taken as sacrifices for Neru. Still fighting, Kim continued to be increasingly pressured by the dragon. Riding on the back of the monster, Neru told Kim that dragons remain the strongest. Desperate to survive, Kim attached a chain to the ceiling to pull himself to the next floor of the building and escape. At that moment, he wondered where that monster had come from. However, with little time to think, the monster appeared before him once again. Before Kim could react, the dragon struck him with its tail, sending him flying. Meanwhile, Neru shouted frantically at the protagonist to die. Momentarily, Kim tried to use a power against the dragon, but it had no effect on the creature. With this failed attempt, the dragon unleashed its green flames, completely obliterating the area. Observing this, Neru remarked that it was unexpected that despite receiving such a powerful attack, Kim had still managed to survive. At the same time, the protagonist clung to the walls with his chains, but he was in a devastated state, completely battered. At that moment, Kim thought that the monster was absurdly strong. He couldn't believe he had barely managed to withstand its attack, even using the full power of predation. This made him question if it was truly S-rank. But considering how much force it was exerting, there was no way its Ophid oral ability could come out unscathed. Even in this condition, the protagonist realized that Neru was nearing his limit. With that, if Kim persisted a little longer, he might be able to survive. Immediately after, Neru starts laughing and calls him a filthy unbeliever. He says he can see what he was thinking. Since a direct confrontation didn't work, he must be thinking of stalling for time. In his words, that wouldn't be a bad strategy. However, Nero tells him he must know that his petty tricks won't work against him. Next, Nero moves with his dragon toward the hostages to destroy them all in a single blow. He strikes the building, causing massive destruction. Immediately afterward, reinforcements manage to establish a full connection with the emergency portal to send them to the coordinates of the eastern point of the building. At that moment, a woman says that her country and New Korea are the only countries connected, and even for a player like him, she thinks entering the portal now could be very dangerous. Hearing this, the player says that's nonsense, and he also tells her to think about how much danger the boy must be in at this very moment. This leaves the woman a little thoughtful, and the man says they will enter the eastern point right now, and that they will take out some terrorists and rescue their companions. On the other side of the portal, the hostages attacked by the dragon are miraculously still alive, and right in front of them is the protagonist fighting to protect them. Laughing, Nero says he already expected the protagonist to make the choice to protect them, and in that case, he tells him he should burn to ashes. Seeing the protagonist in dire straits, the man tells him not to worry about them, and asks what good it would do if he ended up losing his life. Hearing the man's words, the protagonist thinks he's right. Since he cannot win in a direct confrontation, the only way to defeat Nero is to push him to his limit, but even so, he still cannot give up. With this in mind, he thinks about how he could save all the hostages. While pondering a way to save all the hostages, he suddenly hears a voice in the background saying they couldn't bear to watch this any longer. Hearing these words, the protagonist looks behind him in astonishment, but sees no one other than his fallen companion on the ground. Then something strange happens to his power. As the rank of his protection is being temporarily adjusted, his power rank increases to A. Then his powers surpass their limits, and his body can no longer handle the predation power. This leaves the protagonist confused, wondering what was happening to him, since all his powers were temporarily increasing, and his predation had already reached rank S, though it was recently rank A. With so much energy being released by this power explosion, the entire scene becomes ominous, making Nero wonder what was going on. As the protagonist's power continues to grow, his player system notifies him that predation cannot be deactivated. While seemingly agonizing in pain, he wonders if the predation has spiraled out of control. Thinking about the voice he heard moments ago, he wonders if the king had given him these powers. As his body disintegrates, he thinks this is ridiculous and questions if he will really die this way, a meaningless death to him, after everything he has done to get to where he is. For him, no matter the cost, he cannot die this way. Even wanting to fight, as his body disintegrates, he falls to the ground, unable to move anymore. Observing this, Nero wonders if he forced himself to lose control of his own ability. However, a devastating energy begins emanating in the area, making him question what kind of ridiculous amount of energy this is. For Nero, the hardest thing to understand is that the protagonist couldn't handle the power of the ability and passed out. Yet he wonders why the ability hasn't stopped even though the protagonist is unconscious. Nero then asks how a mere filthy unbeliever dares to do this, and says that if he intends to kill himself to oppose a god, then Nero will kill the protagonist with his own hands. He then advances with his dragon toward the young man, but a blast of power is launched against him, and his dragon loses one of its legs. Nero is confused and wonders what is happening. Soon after, the old man realizes that the protagonist is still standing, and that around the building are several enormous, furious monsters. Kim Tae-hyun laughs as he remembers the man calling himself a god. Frightened, Nero questions who that person is, as that is no longer the protagonist. The young man in turn says the old man shouldn't worry about it because he was already dead. Then he uses his new ability, striking Nero and his dragon directly. Momentarily, the protagonist finds himself in his subconscious. After that, he is bound by chains. He questions whether it was stone skin or paralysis. A demonic entity appears above the boy. While in agony, Kim Tae-hyun says those were his abilities. The demon laughs upon hearing that, mocking the fact that the power never belonged to the protagonist, and that he must pay the price for what he consumes. The creature then advances toward the boy. However, the protagonist falls out of his bed, and wonders if it was all just a dream. He then notices he has no injuries and that his right arm, which had collapsed due to consumption, is also fine. Shortly after, Sung-jin enters the room. While they eat lunch, the man says that the house was prepared for the boy by the association, and by the alchemists as a response to the terrorist incident. He then mentions that Ryo-hye had been arrested and that, considering the scale of the terror, many people had survived, and that the boy's relatives had visited him. Sung-jin then comments that the medical results showed no health issues for the young man, and that he stayed because he was concerned about the minors. The protagonist remains silent, and says he clearly lost consciousness while fighting the Golden Alpid. He then asks the man what happened. After defeating Nero, one of the civilians asks what that entity had done to the protagonist. Kim Tae-hyun uses his ability, and the man begins coughing up blood. Shortly after, the demon smiles and says it will retreat for now, and then the boy faints. After some time, Sung-jin and his men arrive at the scene, confirming that there were survivors. A woman mentions that everyone seemed to have lost consciousness without any life-threatening issues. However, the miners and the Golden Alpid are missing. While holding the protagonist, the man wonders what happened there. Afterward, Sung-jin says the survivors only remembered the boy trying to stop the Golden Alpid but couldn't recall the details, as if something was interfering with their minds. The man stands up and says he believes it to be the work of those miners. As he leaves the room, Sung Jin tells the protagonist to take care of himself, and that if more information came in, he would contact him. Kim Tae-gyeon then thinks about how his arm had regenerated even after collapsing due to excessive consumption, and that perhaps the golden op-ed was also affected by the consumption. After that, Sung Jin reappears, saying the boy had another visitor, and then Lim Aeung enters the room holding a basket of fruit, placing it on top of the boy's food. She then asks if the protagonist is okay because she heard he was injured, and that he had saved many people during this recent terrorist attack, facing two S-rank opponents. The girl gets irritated and crushes an apple, saying the protagonist should be arrogant. Kim Tae-gyeon asks what the young woman is doing there. Lim Aeung gets nervous and replies that she was there to visit a sick person. Then she wonders what that incredible aura around the boy was, and then someone knocks on the door. The protagonist wonders who that person might be. Afterward, Sis appears. Lim Aeung asks what she was doing in the protagonist's house and how she knew his house's password. The woman responds that the password was provided by the association. Shortly after, Sis grabs the protagonist. Lim Aeung questions what the woman is doing and says it's a crime because the boy is still a minor. Kim Tae-gyeon frees himself from the woman and asks what she is doing there. Sis replies that she is just visiting a sick person and says she brought a gift. The woman then asks if he was aiming for the Asia-friendly games, and that despite his achievements in the Eastern Point, he was still in 30th place in public merit, needing a significant score to qualify for the top 5. Sis then says she will give him the double dungeon. In a mysterious location, a man asks about the whereabouts of the golden op-ed, but his subordinate responds that they still had no confirmation, and questions whether they should report it to the boss. However, the man says there is no need, because they had already achieved their purpose and he was merely a hired gun. A massive ship corners a small boat. The captain says they must lay down their weapons and surrender immediately. However, the ship is quickly sunk by the mysterious man, who in turn says the protagonist is very intriguing. At the headquarters of the Gita Nightwalker, people become excited to see that Kim Tae-gyeon is participating in the raid. Sis comments that even if they grant the boy raid rights, the item distribution and team composition will still be decided by them. The protagonist is surprised to realize that the gift he received was the unlocking of the Fire Temple. This temple was the entrance to the Scorching Flame, the country's second double dungeon discovered. Before the regression, the Nightwalker Guild succeeded in their raid but suffered near total devastation. Considering the risk, a significant increase in growth and public merit is guaranteed. But the protagonist thinks that with all that support, a double dungeon raid like that shouldn't have any failures. Approximately 300 members were assigned to the mission. However, only the boy and Sis would go on the mission. Kim Tae-gyeon asks why only they are going, and the woman replies that this is a date. Upon entering the portal, the girl is amazed because in front of them is a massive crater. She comments that the vibe in this place feels different from a regular dungeon. She then asks the protagonist if double dungeons are always like this. Kim Tae-gyeon responds that at least the apocalyptic dungeon he was in was like this. He warns her to be cautious as there are likely traps or monsters. Right after, a tentacle emerges from the crater and drags Yu Ae-young inside. The boy rushes to help her because he knew such things could happen in this world. However, upon entering the pit, the woman has already defeated the creature that pulled her in. Yet, at the bottom of the crater, there are still other monsters. But Yu Ae-young is unfazed and charges at them. She easily kills the creatures using her powers. Seeing all that power, the protagonist is impressed as she defeats those Ranka monsters with just one blow. He thinks to himself that he hadn't expected her to be so skilled. He then decides to put in more effort as well. After defeating all the creatures, the girl breathes a sigh of relief that they succeeded. Kim Tae-gyeon reflects on how high the monsters' levels were, but they weren't enough to pose a problem for Yu Ae-young. Right after, the woman hands the warrior's ring to the protagonist, saying that by doing so, her guild also benefits. She adds that she could give him many more items if he joined her guild. The boy questions why she didn't give him the item before they faced the monsters. He then says that from this point onward, they'll need to be careful, because they've reached the domain of this place. Before them stands a giant egg. Kim Tae-gyeon says he's certain that inside that egg is the dungeon boss. He then suggests to the girl that they should gather information. But without hesitation, the woman rushes forward and breaks the egg. After the explosion, the protagonist asks if she's okay. Yu Ae-young turns with a sinister look, but then she smiles and says she's fine. She remarks that judging by its strength, the monster appeared to be lower rank S, though she hadn't expected to break it with just one blow. Right after, a glow emerges from the egg. The monster inside speaks, saying it has interesting guests. Then a phoenix appears, a monster with regenerative abilities and such immense resilience that it could be mistaken for an immortal being. Kim Tae-gyeon is startled to realize the dungeon boss is a phoenix. He then asks Yu Ae-young to be careful because the creature has mind control capabilities. However, the woman charges at the boy as she's already under the phoenix's control. The boy dodges her attacks and uses his demonic powers to counter her, urging her to come to her senses. After this, the woman throws an energy sphere at the protagonist. The phoenix observes the situation from afar, laughing as it remarks how humans are always such fools. Magical chains suddenly appear, binding the woman, The protagonist declares that he now knows who is responsible for the annihilation of the Nightwalker Guild's squad. He then uses a physical attack on the woman, causing Yu Aoyang to faint. Kim Tae-hyun says she needs to recover her senses by the time she wakes up, but perhaps that won't matter as long as he eliminates the phoenix. The creature laughs and asks if the human enjoyed its game. The protagonist becomes enraged and says he will make it meet their creator. He then ties Yu Aoyang to his back and tries to escape the phoenix. However, the phoenix attempts to stop them and asks what the boy is trying to do. The protagonist tries to throw his dagger at the creature, but the weapon passes through the phoenix. The creature explains that this happened because it is fire itself. It then says that in the end, a mere human like him could never defeat it, and the phoenix begins destroying the cavern. Kim Tae-hyun says that even as a phoenix, that level of regenerative capability was different. He adds that it also had giganification, so there was no way that creature could be normal. He begins to suspect it might be a great phoenix. Mutant organisms that possess powers beyond the class of regular monsters, and to distinguish them, they earn the title Great. Kim Tae-hyun thinks that if he's correct, it means he wouldn't stand a chance against the monster unless he used his ability Predation. However, there was a chance something like the last time could happen, so he couldn't use it unless it was the decisive blow. But the boy knows he wouldn't stand a chance of winning without Predation. Shortly after, Yu Aoyang wakes up from her fainting and asks what is happening. The protagonist tells her to stop moving. Then they begin to argue and the girl says she won't fall into the phoenix's control again. Shortly after, the creature tries to attack them and asks how they dared to be distracted in its presence. After that, the protagonist unties the woman from the chains so they can fight together. He warns her not to fall under the phoenix's control this time, and Yu Aoyang thanks him for his concern. The creature becomes irritated, saying they didn't understand that they stood no chance against it. Kim Tae-hyun takes the lead, and the party members' stats increase. Yu Aoyang says it's time and decides to use her ability, causing damage to the phoenix. The protagonist is completely surprised to see that. The girl then uses her Amazon Spirit transformation. There's a concept of going berserk, triggering the reverse flow of mana for all abilities. Most people avoid using it because it can cause permanent damage to the body, but she can control this power even for a short period of time. She then throws her Spear of the Phoenix, managing to wound the creature. Before it can regenerate, Yu Aoyang charges at it, landing a punch followed by a kick. After this sequence of attacks, the Phoenix falls to the ground. Shortly after, the girl collapses from exhaustion. Seeing the situation, the Phoenix says it will take advantage of the girl's vulnerability to kill her. However, the magical chains reappear, restraining the creature. Kim Tae-hyun says he can't believe the girl used a destructive power far beyond to crush its regenerative abilities. While carrying Yu Aoyang in his arms, he says he'll hurt her pride by landing the final blow on the monster. Outside the portal, people are worried because the pair is taking too long to return. They are also concerned because every time their guild master enters a battle, she always does reckless things. Shortly after, the protagonist emerges from the portal carrying the girl in his arms and announcing they had cleared the Temple of Fire. On the internet, rumors start spreading that Yu Aoyang is dating the protagonist. The girl becomes embarrassed and wonders what that meant. She questions how the news had leaked since it was a private raid. One of the men gets nervous and says it was hard to keep it secret. Another guy adds that he only told a few close friends. Hearing that, the girl smiles in a frightening way and says they were all going to die together. A while later, her boss enters the room saying he heard rumors that she used her berserk ability. However, the girl had already destroyed the entire room along with the guys. Shortly after, while walking, Yu Aoyang says she had trained to control her berserk state, so using it for just 1 minute was easy. The man asks if she had already figured out Kim Tae-hyun's capabilities. The girl replies that after she fainted, the protagonist fought against the Great Phoenix, and that says it all. She adds that apparently he's already heading toward the abyssal depths. Hearing that, the man is surprised by his rapid growth. Yu Aoyang comments that she doesn't understand because everyone has the desire to advance, but after going a certain way, it's easy to feel satisfied. However, Kim Tae-hyun shows no signs of stopping, using all methods available to go further. Then the girl questions what might be driving him to desperately try to become stronger. The man in turn says he believes it's because the protagonist loves his country. Since monsters are everywhere, he desires his country to advance with prosperity. But Yu Aoyang says that's impossible. Somewhere in the abyssal depths, two people are sitting on thrones surrounded by corpses. The man seated says to the other that they are now connected. That man is the Archduke of the Abyss. The kneeling person thanks their lord and says that now they will be the strongest of all. The protagonist enters the abyssal portal, saying it is his first time returning to the abyss after regressing. A person appears welcoming the boy and introducing himself as a member of the World Association of Players and the manager of the Abyssal Depths District, Paula Becker. He then says that, according to the records, this is the boy's first time in the abyss, and the protagonist confirms. The man explains that the boy needs to hire some players to act as guides or mercenaries. The World Association of Players has created player zones, which serve as camps and safe areas to aid in exploring each district of the abyss. However, the depths are dangerous as they could be ambushed by monsters. Thus, the protagonist needs to hire some players to accompany him, but he says is unnecessary. Soon after, a worm emerges from the ground behind the boy, but Kim Tae-hyun quickly eliminates it and reassures Paulo that there's no need to worry since he is just taking a small stroll. He then breathes a sigh of relief, seeing no one else around. After defeating the Great Phoenix in the Fire Temple, the protagonists fulfill the requirement of 200 magical powers needed to activate the demonic contract. However, this ability has changed. Instead of controlling monsters, it can now create portals. The boy wonders if this is also an effect of predation. He thinks it would be better to have a powerful creature than to carry around dozens of monsters. So he decides to use the amplifying stone, temporarily enhancing his powers. The demonic contract is activated, initiating the creation of the gate. Kim Tae-hyun crosses the gate and finds a massive castle on the other side. Seeing this, he reflects that he has never heard of this place in the abyss and wonders exactly where he is. 3 demons then appear behind him, attacking and causing a massive explosion, yet the boy remains standing. Upon seeing the protagonist's dagger, the demons remark that it is a dangerous weapon. Kim Tae-hyun realizes these creatures are succubi. Succubi are monsters that drain men's energy through mental attacks like illusions or brainwashing. Kim Tae-hyun charges at the demons, intending to defeat them if they are targets of the contract. However, the succubi easily dodge his attacks. They remark that taming him will be difficult, deciding to use one of their abilities on the protagonist. The boy remains still, and one of the succubi says no man can resist her ability. But Kim Tae-hyun grabs the creature and slams her head into the ground. The other demons look at this in shock. The protagonist then points at them and commands them to bow their heads. The succubi are forced to lower their heads to the boy. One of the demons asks how a human could resist her mind control. Kim Tae-hyun responds that being interested in monsters is abnormal. He then says they should make a contract. To form a monster summoning contract, one of 2 conditions must be met: giving the monster what it desires or forcibly seducing the creature. The protagonist thinks this will allow him to command some monsters. However, he discovers this is not the goal of his contract. Upon learning this, the boy is surprised. Suddenly, several succubi appear behind him, saying he will make a great gift for the queen. Inside the castle, several bodies are hanging from thorny vines. One of the queen's maids notifies her that a human has invaded the castle. The queen laughs and says she'll have some entertainment. Inside the castle, an explosion occurs. Several succubi are chasing the protagonist. They intercept him, seemingly trying to seduce the boy. But at that moment, he invokes his ability, successfully countering the spell and defeating them all. Observing the situation, he concludes that if the succubi are not the contract target, there is only one possibility. A monster capable of controlling all those creatures must exist, likely the queen. The boy then encounters a maid, who asks if he is an intruder and says he should proceed, because the queen is expecting him. A while later, Kim is already in that room. The queen welcomes the protagonist to her palace and introduces herself as the mother of all succubi, named Rosaria. The spirit reveals that she is the target of the demonic contract, and that he can now form the summoning pact. Once again, the woman states her name is Rosaria. At that moment, the protagonist is surprised by what he heard, because that was a monster speaking the human language. Rosaria says there is no reason to be so shocked. She states that she was once human, and for that reason, understands his language. Observing the woman's manner of speaking, the protagonist is astonished as she spoke differently from a monster. Shortly after, Rosaria asks the reason for his visit to her castle and if by any chance he had come there to satisfy his lust. However, Kim replies that it was none of those reasons. Instead, he wanted to form a summoning pact. Hearing what the boy said, she bursts out laughing. She claims he would never be able to achieve such a thing, but that he should keep his delusions within limits. Shortly after, the succubus seems to start attacking the protagonist, who then says it was just as he had thought. In the same instant, he invokes his ability, managing to defend against the attack, saying he would have to handle it with his own power. Once again, the succubus tries to attack the boy, who then manages to dodge all her attacks and even counterattacks her. At that moment, he leaps forward, attacking the queen once again. But suddenly, his chains are broken, leaving him very surprised by what he saw. The woman begins to laugh, saying it was very amusing. Shortly after, she snaps her fingers and something extremely strange starts happening. The protagonist feels like he is falling into a bottomless abyss. At the same time, a view of some buildings appears above him. Surprised, Kim wonders what it is as he can't apply his abilities to his equipment, and moreover, the central space seemed to have shifted. Observing the situation, Kim thinks it must be an illusion. However, he wants to know when exactly he fell into it. Meanwhile, the queen is observing everything coldly. She says he has been hypnotized from the beginning and for that reason has always been in her grasp. Meanwhile, Kim is still hallucinating in the middle of that water, thinking he really needs to escape from it. At that moment, he notices something as the scene changes suddenly. Looking around, the protagonist wonders what it is. Looking ahead, he finds himself face to face with his younger self, who appears to be excited about something, saying he also wants to awaken. His parents, watching this, are very happy. However, his mother says the most important thing is that he has a happy and healthy life. As he observes these memories, the protagonist thinks it was just like that. After all, his father and mother were always like that. Instead of wanting him to achieve a high rank or someday support their poor family, they always wished for his happiness. As he watches this, the protagonist seems happy, but in the next instant, things change. Because the car suddenly appears in flames and his family is destroyed. The boy, meanwhile, can only watch everything in silence. Several scenes from his horrifying past flash through his mind. These memories have always haunted the boy. He thinks he wasn't awakened because he wasn't strong enough, and he couldn't bear to stand against the misfortunes that occurred daily on his path. However, there was something much harder to endure than that, the fact that he didn't help others. Instead, he dragged those who helped him into his misfortunes. His parents truly wished for his happiness, but to be happy, he needed more strength. The scene then shifts back to the present, and the system alerts him that an ability has been detected. As a result, the queen's hypnosis is confirmed, and he attempts to resist using that mysterious power. However, the attempt fails, and as a consequence, his stats are reduced. Thus, he is unable to use his chain ability, and the rest of his abilities are blocked as well. However, there is one ability he can use, predation. At that moment, Kim uses it, and all those horrible memories start to disappear. Observing the situation, the queen says it's very surprising, because he still intends to survive even after facing all that. However, there are some things that don't seem right. In some memories, he appears older than he is now. Additionally, there are memories with outcomes that are opposite to the current timeline. For that reason, the boy probably has many secrets, and so she wants to know what he has to say. As she observes, the woman begins to laugh, but suddenly she becomes surprised, and a light begins to envelop the area with an unknown person appearing. Seeing them, the queen assumes that must be the king. However, everything is shattered in a matter of seconds. The protagonist, standing behind the woman, says she was spying on someone else's memories, and for that reason, she had a very stressful hobby. He states once again that she should accept his summoning pact with him. Observing the situation, the queen is very surprised, because he managed to escape her illusion. Yet she thinks he's still as foolish as ever. Then the queen asks if he thinks he can kill her with just that toy. Kim responds that he'll have to try to find out if he can. The queen says he's probably bluffing, and in the same instant grabs the protagonist, declaring she will accept the pact. She then bites the protagonist's neck. With this, the system notifies him that he has fulfilled the conditions of the pact, and thus it has been established. Additionally, the rank of his skill has been adjusted, and a new hypnosis ability has been registered. Shortly after, Kim falls unconscious, and the queen wishes him a good night's sleep, saying she has chosen him. Time passes, and Kim wakes up to someone calling him. The other man asks if he's okay, and expresses relief that the boy is safe. Kim asks where he is, and Paulo replies that it's the player zone, and that he found him unconscious during his patrol. Observing the situation, Kim assumes Rosaria brought him to this place. Looking at his status, he notices the hypnosis ability and begins analyzing all his statistics. He confirms it was as he suspected. It wasn't a dream. Additionally, he has a new ability, hypnosis, and with the succubus's summoning, he could even face opponents at the level of an entire nation's strength. However, he still wishes to know what suddenly changed her mind. Furthermore, she told him to sleep well in their last moment together, revealing that she also knows about the king. Shortly after, Paulo calls for the protagonist, asking what he plans to do now, suggesting he might hire a player to act as his guide. Kim thanks him for his concern, but says everything is fine, as he has finished his business for now. For this reason, he will rest and return home, and the scene shifts to a hospital. A girl seems to be leaving the hospital. Soon after, someone congratulates her on leaving the hospital, asking if she's feeling better. The girl says not only is she fine, but she has also beaten up a few people. The man responds that something more important has come up, saying he has news that might interest her, because the protagonist has returned from the abyssal depths. The woman is surprised, noting that he returned very quickly. The man explains that the place is called the Tomb of Rank S for a reason, but his return isn't the primary concern about that place. The issue is that he encountered that person from before, the leader of one of the 4 great guilds, whose name is Kan. The scene then cuts to the protagonist meeting that man. The man asks if his name is Kim, and if so, says he should duel him. Looking at the man, the protagonist recognizes him, confirming he is the leader of one of the 4 great guilds, and is known as the best tank in New Korea. He is also an extremely strong and prestigious individual. Shortly after, the man charges at the protagonist. Then a woman runs toward the situation, asking what the man thinks he's doing, because if he continues, he could be banned from this place. She says he'll need to find a way to apologize for what happened. Afterward, the girl introduces herself, saying she is the secretary of that man. She acknowledges the guild master's reputation, citing his forced, non-humanitarian recruitment methods. But they're there to officially recruit the protagonist. So if he expresses an intent to join them, there's no need for a duel. Kim asks if they're trying to force him into it. The secretary admits it's true, but says it's not a bad offer for him, because as far as she knows, he will be participating in the Asian Exhibition Games. And among the 4 great guilds, hers specializes in abyssal exploration. For this reason, they can provide support for him. This way, he could earn enough merit points to compensate for any that were lacking. Hearing that offer, Kim remains silent. Shortly after, Kang says that it's already enough because if he were influenced by words alone, he would have accepted the offer a long time ago. However, Kim replies that it's not true because he had indeed changed his mind. Kang then asks if, by any chance, he's planning to join his group. But the protagonist questions what kind of nonsense he's talking about. He says they would truly do things his way, and for that reason, Kang would have to defeat him if he really wanted him to join the group. Hearing what the boy said, Kang becomes very excited. The scene then cuts to an arena where several people are trying to interview the protagonist. They ask why he accepted the duel with Kang. Hearing all those questions, Kim stays silent, thinking how irritating it all is. Shortly after, an unfamiliar girl appears. She says she needs to talk to the boy. Kim then takes the woman by the hand. He says it's been a long time since he last saw her, assuming they must have met during the players' tests. The woman says that's true, and for that reason, it's been a while since they've met. Observing the situation, the girl is very surprised because the protagonist actually remembers her. Letting go of her hand, Kim says any questions she has will be answered later. Because, as she knows due to his plans with Kang, he doesn't have time to answer anything now. For that reason, he says goodbye and meanwhile begins climbing some stairs. Looking ahead, he comes face to face with his opponent. It's revealed that Kang is already in front of him. Kim is pleased because his battle is about to begin. The announcer starts talking about the match. He states that the victory condition is to make your opponent kneel. As he prepares, Kang says he will test the boy's abilities, and the order is given for the battle to begin. At that moment, Kim activates his ability. He thinks that now, with all the power of the spirit of the Night King, he could take down even an S-class monster with a single strike. And even someone like Kang wouldn't be able to move so quickly. Observing the attack, Kang says it's not bad, but still not enough to defeat him. Shortly after, he appears behind the protagonist and lands a blow on him. However, Kim manages to dodge, but without giving him a moment to breathe, Kang advances again, landing another punch. Again, the protagonist manages to defend the attack, but it's still not enough, because Kang doesn't give him a moment to catch his breath. He advances again, delivering another kick to the boy's face. Watching this, Kang is very pleased, stating that Kim is very good at running, so he will improve that skill. He asks how Kim plans to win that way. Kim replies that unless Kang has a hidden beast, it won't be easy to make him kneel. Kang says that for someone cornered, Kim sure knows how to talk a lot. For that reason, he's truly testing his patience. Observing the scene, the crowd goes wild, because Kang's about to unleash his final move. That attack is extremely powerful, and almost no one has ever resisted it. Meanwhile, the girl is watching everything from above. She says she's happy to have witnessed the fight. The man next to her says that if the protagonist loses, they'll have to join Kang's group. The girl agrees, saying he's right. However, she adds that she should have stopped the duel from happening, because Kang's ability is the blessing of animals. The man explains that it mimics the strength of various animals, and it showcases an incredible amount of power in combat. Even for the protagonist, winning a fight against him seemed highly unlikely. However, the girl says it's not like that, because from what she's seen of the protagonist, he has power comparable to Kang's. Meanwhile, Kang's attack is still heading toward the boy. The entire crowd is anticipating the collision of their attacks. But within seconds, something unexpected happens. Kang is simply defeated. The crowd watching is stunned, because the man who had never knelt is finally beaten. However, the audience demands another fight, claiming that the result doesn't count. For that reason, they argue the fight is probably invalid. Meanwhile, Kang is deep in thought about his defeat. The protagonist thinks he's happy with the ability he used, because it worked perfectly. Observing the situation, Kang is extremely frustrated, because he truly lost. Additionally, the protagonist used a mind control ability, and for that reason, he never saw it coming. Right after, Kang demands everyone to shut up, stating that he didn't know what ability that was, but losing was his failure, and thus the result was what it was. For that reason, they should calmly accept the outcome of that fight, and if anyone is dissatisfied, they should face him. Observing the situation, another girl comments that losing to the protagonist really irritated her, and that for Kang to kneel like that, the protagonist must have an incredible ability. For that reason, the boy never ceases to amaze her. Shortly after, the man appears in front of the protagonist. Kim extends his hand and says it was a good match. The man then says he wants to ask something, questioning if Kim had planned to win that way from the beginning. Kim responds that under certain circumstances, yes. Hearing this, the man becomes very irritated, but still shakes the protagonist's hand, saying that promise is a promise, asking if he wants money or even a unique item. Kim says that wouldn't be bad, but it's not what he desires. The man asks again what he wants. The protagonist replies that he wants the Minotaur's Labyrinth, leaving the man very surprised by his request. Sometime later, the scene shifts to another location. A man asks if they are talking about the Minotaur's Labyrinth, and another confirms, saying it's the entrance to an abyssal dungeon. It's filled with traps and complex spaces, so they'll need someone with detection abilities. Even though it's at the abyssal entrance, many rank as guilds and players have taken on the challenge and failed. The guild currently holds the raid rights and is about to attempt it again in secret. The man, surprised, asks how Kim could know about that place and if he's okay. The other responds that he couldn't say he isn't stressed, but you can never predict what will happen in the abyss. All they can do is trust those who take on the challenge. To be honest, if he were younger, he would also participate. He reflects that his current concern isn't the difficulty of the dungeon, but rather the people involved, and he hopes his worries won't come true. At the same time, a group begins contacting the president. Apologizing for bothering him, they state it's an urgent matter. They mention that the Japanese Hunter Association has reached out to them. Another boy, surprised, asks what they are talking about as the issue should already be resolved. Shortly after, a girl mentions that the Saint has sent an invitation to a player named Kim. Sometime later, the scene shifts to the control room of the Great Association Gate. A countdown begins. Amid it all, the protagonist observes everything in silence. Shortly after, the order is given and the entire group heads toward the portal. The scene then cuts to inside the portal, where a battle is underway. Kim is defeating the monsters. Soon after, a man appears saying Kim's abilities are impressive and asking if he likes the weapon he was given. Kim replies that it's not bad, but mentions he had to send his weapon for repairs anyway. The man explains that he planned to tell him that if he joined the guild, because having the protagonist on the raid team benefits them, and it didn't seem fair to use it as a reward for that bet. Kim thanks him and then asks if he's sure about the Minotaur's Labyrinth raid. Everyone has failed to defeat the Minotaur in the last 30 years, and without special measures, it won't be easy. Shortly after, a girl appears, asking him not to worry, because everyone participating in the raid is at least a rank B player. They've already been defeating monsters steadily without rushing. Additionally, the guild's vice leader has been detecting and removing all the traps in the labyrinth. Furthermore, they found some clues about the labyrinth raid a few months ago. Hearing this explanation, Kim states that this only means one thing. The man explains they discovered the corpse of a monster apparently from the labyrinth in the abyssal depths. A giant minotaur's corpse with the same tattoos and patterns found throughout the labyrinth. Additionally, when they touched the corpse, all of it, except for the horn, turned to dust. Because of this, if the monster truly comes from the labyrinth, they could use tracking skills to follow its trail. Sometime later, the scene shifts again. The protagonist group seems to be heading toward a specific location. Shortly after, they arrive at their destination, the end of the labyrinth. Before them, the statue of a giant minotaur was observing them. The other man, confused, asks where the boss is, and the man replies that it seems they need to complete the horn of that statue. Shortly after, the secretary appears with the horn from earlier. Meanwhile, Kim is silently observing everything, thinking that so far, everything was unfolding exactly as it had in his previous regression. For that reason, he needed to see what would happen next. Then that man takes the horn and places it on the statue. The group is thrilled because they were finally able to complete the labyrinth after 30 years. At that moment, the man seems to notice something, because something unusual is happening with the statue. In a matter of seconds, it transforms into a skeleton. The group looking around is very confused, because they are now in a completely different place from before. The scene then cuts to another location, and the protagonist thinks this is exactly as expected. The group, surprised, wonders what had happened. Shortly after, the scene cuts to a man reading a book. He says he has noticed something. He assumes the protagonist has joined the labyrinth team. The man then states they could stop the operation immediately. However, the young man asks not to stop because this was actually a perfect opportunity. Ranked villains had infiltrated Hyde's team, including 20 rank of villains in total. No matter how skilled the protagonist was, everything had its limits. So he wondered how they would deal with the hidden villains while working in the labyrinth. And for that reason, it was all very amusing. The scene then cuts to the inside of the labyrinth. A person suggests they should introduce themselves first, and a girl introduces herself. She says her name is Miranda, and she's a rank B player. Immediately after, Kim acts quickly for some reason. In that instant, he kicks the girl, saying she's a villain. Kim is the youngest rank as individual in existence. People were always curious to know what kind of person he was. Supposedly, he was a hero like a guild master, always acting as a reliable shield on the front lines, or maybe even a saint, as the rumors suggested. He sacrificed himself to save the citizens of the Eastern Point, which was very unlike someone like him. There was no doubt that the protagonist was an incredible person. The boy observing the scene is surprised because he's witnessing the protagonist assaulting the woman. The young man, confused, asks what Kim had done. Kim responds that the girl is a villain, so he shouldn't worry about it. Drawing his weapon, the man says that's a lie. He then fires the weapon at the protagonist. Dodging the bullets, Kim says it's the truth. However, the man refuses to listen, thinking Miranda was a precious comrade who had been hunting monsters and exploring with them for a long time. For that reason, there was no possibility she was a villain. It was completely impossible. Approaching the girl, the man asks her to wake up. At that moment, the girl punches the man, telling him not to touch her. Immediately after, a group of adventurers appears behind the protagonist. However, that wasn't enough. Kim easily dodges the attack. He wonders who would think there would be 3 villains in total. And for that reason, he decides to take them all out at once. Then the girl seems to prepare for battle, saying it's very strange, because even among the individual's comrades who had been with them for years, no one had been noticed. Asking how Kim knew all this, the boy tells her not to worry because it wasn't a matter of her actions. The truth is that Kim had come from the future. Hearing the explanation, the girl says she doesn't care and immediately charges at Kim. She manages to deliver an attack which Kim narrowly avoids. Shortly after, another comrade interferes in the battle. Another also charges at the protagonist. However, Kim narrowly evades the attacks. At that moment, a chain is invoked, successfully binding 2 members of the group. However, the girl is still in the battle. Kim notices this and successfully anticipates her attack. Surprised, the girl wonders what happened. She states she didn't know Kim was that strong. Her ability causes vomiting, paralysis, and hallucinations when her nails make contact. Even an S-class player couldn't escape her magic, and she had definitely scratched the protagonist's face at the start. Even so, he hadn't suffered any effects so far. At that moment, Kim ended up apologizing for something. Then he invoked his ability, stating that this type of poison did not affect him. The girl, in turn, became very frightened by the power before her. At the same instant, the attack hit her. Time passed. The scene then cut to that crazy guy again. Surprised, he was observing something ahead. He realized that the protagonist was standing before the girl, who apparently was defeated. Irritated, she began to insult the protagonist. At that moment, Kim grabbed the girl by the head. Apologizing, he said he didn't have time to play with her, and for that reason, they were going to do something fun. At the same instant, Kim activated his hypnosis ability. He began asking several questions about her group. The girl then started to fall under hypnosis, revealing that there were 20 infiltrators, including Rank S members, and their objective was to sabotage the Labyrinth raid. The scene then shifted to another location, where several flowers were stained with someone's ketchup. A secretary, observing what was in front of her, looked very surprised. They were apparently trying to kill that man from earlier. The scene shifted back to the protagonist, who was with the woman who seemed unconscious. Sieg thought there were 5 Rank S villains and was sure there had only been 3 before he returned to his world. There had also been an incident involving a gate breach. The future was changing little by little. He supposed this might have happened because of his return. Kim said that in any case, they now knew their goal, and for that reason, they should join the other group. So the two began walking toward that group. Meanwhile, the other guy was still in disbelief that Miranda was really a villain. He wondered if the protagonist had known all of this from the beginning. Kim then said that the way out of there was simpler than he had imagined. That place seemed completely different from before, but was still part of the labyrinth. Therefore, there should be a passage connecting to another space somewhere else. And since it connected to various spaces, it might not reach it all at once. However, they kept passing through doors, it would eventually find that group. At that moment, the boy began to speak, saying he had a question. He questioned why Kim hadn't told the others about this. Because if he had told Master Tagilda about the villain's infiltration from the beginning, none of this would have happened. After that, the two started staring at each other. The protagonist then responded that it was foolish to think that way because it didn't depend on him. Moreover, that other man already knew all about it. The scene then cut to another location, where that guy seemed to be fighting a group of people. He asked what they were doing, as this joke was going too far. Then the secretary had to intervene in the situation. But within seconds, another adventurer appeared to intercept the girl. The man noticed this and immediately protected her from the attack. He then remarked that this was like being in hell. The secretary, worried, asked if he was okay. However, the man asked her to just stay back because he would handle everything. At that moment, he activated his ability and a battle began to unfold. The secretary said there was no need to protect her because she could fly as well. However, the leader said she shouldn't do that because she couldn't handle those people. Shortly after, the other man said the girl was right, because he didn't have the luxury of protecting others in that situation. Since all this time, they hadn't been hiding their powers. Shortly after, that guy's lantern broke. From within it, an unknown creature emerged. The man then remarked that everyone there was at least rank A, with 4 of them being rank S, and they had all done this to kill a man. The man, surprised that they had made many preparations and thought he had a good eye for people. The other man then told him not to worry too much about it, because the evil guild had been working on this plan for years. Therefore, there was no way someone as foolish as him could have uncovered it. The man, irritated, supposed the protagonist was really right about this, because he had said earlier that a group of villains was planning to assassinate him. At first, he thought it was all a lie, but then he realized it was true. The man, surprised, wondered who knew all about this plan. However, there was something more important. He asked why he hadn't done anything about it. Thus, the man says that a true man never doubts his companions, and as the master of all, he should not doubt them. The group then starts laughing at the man, saying they knew he was stupid from the very beginning, wondering how many years they had worked with that kind of idiot. The secretary then gets very irritated because he hadn't even verified the information about those people. At the same moment, that skull from before ends up being activated, delivering an attack toward the man who barely manages to dodge. The other man then says he had done a good job, thanking him for making the stupidity of keeping them in his team and that, for this reason, he could now die. The man replies that he had said he didn't want to doubt them. At the same moment, he ends up invoking his skill, striking the other man from before who was easily defeated, affirming that it was actually him who was the idiot. The scene then cuts to another location, with that other boy asking if he was saying how Dagda already knew about all of that. He replies that if he knew that, he shouldn't ask stupid questions. The scene cuts again to another location, where the protagonist is now in front of Kang, asking if he will still leave him lying in the same state as before. Kang then gets up, asking if he didn't think he had seen all his power, affirming that he shouldn't worry because he already believed in the protagonist. However, he never said he would leave it that way. Now it's just the way you wanted. It is revealed that the group had already been brutally defeated. The other boy observing this is surprised. Kim then ends up entering that portal. Thus, he comes across that other man from before. The The man asks if Kim hadn't seen the other group, and the boy replies that he hadn't. And given the situation, he only noticed the path ahead, ignoring the rest of the group. Asking what the man was planning to do at that moment, the man remains silent, saying it was frustrating, but he would have to retreat for the moment, because there could still be more villains, and even if they reached the end of the labyrinth, the boss had not yet appeared. And as frustrating as it was, the only option left was to find an escape before suffering more damage. For this reason, he wanted to apologize to the protagonist because that wouldn't have happened if he weren't so stubborn. Shortly after, Kim says that as long as he knows that, it's enough. The man, irritated, says he went out of his way to apologize, and yet the protagonist was treating him like that. Observing the situation, Kim thinks he had wasted time and hadn't gained any merit points, but that was the right choice at that moment, because he even shared other information about the villains to help with the labyrinth raid. Then the secretary appears, saying they should gather to leave the labyrinth. Kim thinks he only had information about the labyrinth raid, and that if the future changed further, he might not have control over everything. For this reason, this time the man was giving up. The secretary then asks if there were any monsters or traps in the other spaces. Hearing this, Kim is very surprised. The other man says they passed through many spaces, but fortunately didn't see any traps, so they believed they could leave safely. Observing the situation, Kim wonders why there were no traps or monsters, because the space they were transferred to is filled with those traps along with monsters. However, the places they passed through were just different areas and didn't particularly threaten the players. For this reason, he needed to know why, because if there were no monsters and traps, there was no way the group could have reached the Labyrinth Master before his regression. At the same moment, Kim seems to realize something, that the whole group starts looking to the side, apparently surprised by something. The other man asks what was in front of them because a fearsome creature was staring at them. It is then revealed that the Labyrinth boss was in that place, who immediately begins swinging his axe, hitting the group squarely, and with the impact, they are all thrown into the air. Additionally, the regression door was destroyed. Shortly after, the other man tries to grab the protagonist to help him. Kim, in turn, says he's aware of the situation and starts running away. At the same moment, that other man begins activating his skill, and consequently, our boy does the same, starting to engage in close combat toward the Minotaur, and shortly after, the three attacks end up colliding. At that moment, the Minotaur attempted to attack again. However, they managed to dodge. Within seconds, his forehead began to glow, and out of nowhere, a skeletal monster appeared. The other man said that it was a rank S monster. Looking back, Kim saw even more monsters. The secretary wondered what was happening as monsters were suddenly appearing. Soon after, a voice began speaking about those wandering through the labyrinth and those disturbing its rest, stating that for that reason, they shouldn't worry and should proceed forward. It said everything would be resolved all at once. Then the group of monsters started advancing on the other two, who, desperate, were merely awaiting their death. However, their leader appeared, managing to defeat some of the Minotaurs, while the protagonist also assisted him. Together, they managed to restrain some of them. Next, the protagonist gave a signal. The man began casting some sort of magic, firing it toward the monsters, which were then defeated. The man remarked that it was impressive, but in the same moment, he was surprised by what he saw. Even though the monsters were severely damaged, they were still alive. With threatening gazes, they began observing the group. At that moment, they seemed to be preparing some sort of attack, firing it toward the other man, who barely dodged and counterattacked with a punch. However, it didn't seem to have much effect. Observing the situation, the man realized that the Minotaurs had regenerative abilities. At that moment, more monsters appeared. The man concluded that he would need to defeat the boss to eliminate all of them at once, but he still didn't know how to achieve that. He could potentially land a blow, but the opponent was not someone he could fight while protecting both the secretary and the protagonist. However, if they could strike simultaneously, there might be a chance. Even so, he kept wondering what to do, because the choice he made would define his path. Then a flashback showed a man asking him to make a choice. The man said that no matter how strong someone was, if they pushed themselves into a duel, the association would have to act. And if he were to accept someone as a comrade, he needed to consider not only their skills, but also what kind of person they were before making a decision. Afterward, the man stated that unlike a reasonable person, he wasn't the type to live doubting everything. The elder said that might suit him better, but sometimes he needed to doubt people more, because he had seen many things during his time as a player, and a small mistake could cost everything. Sometimes he would have to give up something precious to protect something more important. For that reason, strength didn't solve everything. He mentioned that recognizing one's limits and choosing what was most important to achieve goals was the priority. Additionally, those were the true qualities of an excellent player. Listening to the explanation, the man fell silent. He asked if the elder was only saying that because he was weak. At that moment, the scene returned to the present. The man said it was his fault for not taking the elder's words seriously. He declared that if he killed his enemies, his comrades would die as a consequence. But even if he defeated the enemies another way, they would die regardless. For that reason, it didn't matter what choice he made, the outcome would always be the same. However, he could not accept those circumstances. In that moment, he charged at the Minotaur, easily defeating it. Afterward, the man called out to the protagonist. He said he would find a way to protect his comrades, and crush those monsters so they would regret it. For that reason, he would make his own choice. Kim, in turn, said he didn't know what the man was talking about. there was still a way to defeat those Minotaurs. Shortly after, an explosion occurred. The Minotaur declared it had made its decision. For that reason, it was a pity. It said this was the worst choice he could have made. But even so, it wouldn't make a difference because the outcome would be the same in the end. Immediately after, the herd of monsters began advancing toward the two. Kang started preparing an attack. He aimed at the group. The Minotaur said it didn't matter how many times he did that, it wouldn't make a difference. At that moment, the protagonist appeared amidst the flames. Kim then began using his mysterious ability. Kang remarked that it was now the protagonist's turn. Kim, in a matter of seconds, ends up using his skill against the Minotaur. Thus, a barrier seemingly had been broken, and the monster appeared to have been successfully hit. Moments before that, Kang asks what the way to defeat that monster was. Kim responds that he was just assuming, but just like the spaces, they are also connected through portals, and the gap where the Minotaur was likely connected to a completely different space. And the monsters were only being revived or even regenerated by the Queen after reaching that space again. Therefore, if she didn't have another space, those monsters would immediately disappear. Kang then starts laughing, saying that if he were wrong, everyone would die. However, Kim responds that the situation wouldn't be different if he did the opposite. Meanwhile, the secretary, along with that other crazy guy, was observing everything in silence because they were witnessing a gigantic battle right in front of them. Again, the scene cuts to the present, with Kim managing to hit the Minotaur, where it apparently caused some damage, and at the same moment, the protagonist is surprised. Then Kang charges toward the Minotaur, where he also delivers an attack. Even so, the monster still remains standing. Within seconds, the creature ends up disappearing. Meanwhile, Kim is crying on the ground. Looking down, he is surprised to see Kang completely injured, missing an arm. At the same moment, something unknown appears. Because through that smoke, the Minotaur emerges again, and with that, the determined group tries to attack once more. However, the Minotaur merely throws the skeletal debris in front of it. While laughing, the creature says they were very incredible humans, and it never thought he would do something like that using a space he had created. However, there was more to it, as until now, it hadn't used its power over the previous laws, and for this reason, it was much stronger than before. At the same moment, the protagonist tries to charge at the creature again, but within seconds, he ends up being struck once more. Those observing are very surprised, thinking they couldn't believe the power gap between them was so vast. Therefore, if he didn't use that skill, he would probably be killed. But even with all that, he still wasn't sure if he could defeat that creature. And if he didn't destroy it in one blow, the predation would definitely enter berserk mode. Thus, many unexpected things could end up happening. Even so, under those circumstances, that was the only choice he had left. Shortly after, a flashback of a child appears, saying that the way to do it was through application, saying he didn't know why he was suddenly asking about how to use skills, because their descriptions were in the stats window, and the way to manipulate one in reality could change its form in various ways, contrary to what was written in the stats window. For example, the boy used spirit magic, which could be applied to strengthen his body, where he was even capable of creating powerful bullets. And in the current battle, he sometimes mixed skills and usually only applied force to his ring. Therefore, if there was a skill he wasn't good at controlling, he should try coding it with his own skill, because he was definitely capable of doing that. Then the scene cuts back to the present, with the protagonist striking the Minotaur again. As a result of that attack, the Minotaur's axe ended up being damaged. Even so, the monster tries to attack Kim again. With a threatening gaze, Kim was observing his prey. Then he appears to be charging up a skill, unleashing it against the monster. Thus, their weapons end up being broken. Shortly after, Kim ends up summoning his chain, managing to bind it to the monster. Then he uses his skill again, affirming that it was just as he thought before, because he really was able to do it. He had vaguely felt it before, because his skill changed form according to his will, which meant he could probably apply it to his other skills. But even so, he didn't know much about that mysterious power. However, it didn't matter what the true nature of his skill was. Shortly after, the boy seemingly managed to defeat the Minotaur, saying he intended to make full use of that skill. After using his skill, the Minotaur starts to completely disintegrate and is utterly defeated. Subsequently, while all the players are inside the room wondering what had happened, the protagonist appears before them with Kwon Kang-hyuk on his back, completely injured. Seeing the two of them, everyone feels relieved and rushes to embrace the protagonist. After the Queen of the Great Minotaur was defeated, the raid team discovered numerous gold and silver treasures hidden in the labyrinth. Among them, the most valuable was an elixir capable of significantly increasing a player's stats just by drinking it. This was a unique great elixir called the Fountain of Vitata. However, there wasn't enough elixir for everyone, so it was given to the protagonist and also to Kwon, who contributed the most to the raid. However, in Kwon's case, he would lose more stats due to the loss of his right arm than he would gain from the elixir. The villains who infiltrated the raid were identified and arrested. Then the players who participated in the raid focused on recovering and resting. And so the chaotic Minotaur Labyrinth raid came to an end. During an interview, a reporter asked Kwon if the rumors about the raid were true. He also asked if it was true that Kwon was planning to retire as a player. However, Kwon Kang-hyuk responded that he wasn't retiring. Instead, he said he was just taking a short break, and a bit annoyed, he called everyone idiots. With a furious look, he asked if they didn't understand the meaning of rest. In the background, a girl from his guild told Kwon to be more careful with his words. Then another reporter asked if it was because of his right arm, while another mentioned the Asian Exhibition Games. When another reporter attempted to ask Kwon a question, Kwon interrupted him. Kwon then replied that the reason was indeed his right arm, but he said they should only focus on the Asian Exhibition Games. He added that someone capable of replacing him had appeared and told the protagonist to speak for himself at that very moment. The reporters then asked if that wasn't Kim Tae-yeon, the rookie player. Another reporter mentioned that following the Labyrinth raid, the protagonist ranked 5th in contribution, making him perfectly qualified for the team. At this moment, they noted that, in addition, there was a rumor that with the Fountain of the Tada he had obtained, he had likely reached an international level position. Hearing this, a woman responded that it was ridiculous and asked if the boy truly understood what the National Strength rank meant. She explained that National Strength rank was for monsters on a completely different level, even among rankless players. The rank was established because they couldn't be classified under other ranks. But before she could say more, the protagonist stepped onto the stage. He introduced himself and said that he would be one of the representatives in the exhibition games. He mentioned that many of them might be concerned about the replacement player Kwon Kang-yuk. He understood that, and no matter how much he had achieved, he was still just a rookie compared to the other players. He also admitted he couldn't guarantee he would perform exceptionally. At that moment, a mysterious man appeared, watching the protagonist. Laughing, he wondered if this would be the new rank of New Korea. Meanwhile, a woman also observing the protagonist said there was currently no way to confirm the rumors about his National Strength rank. In a restaurant, a young man asked his companion whether the protagonist was confident or not. However, the other man replied that it was obvious he wasn't and asked if he thought anyone could achieve the National Strength rank, adding that he had known this would happen from the beginning. So the video ends here. If you don't want to miss the next part, activate the notification bell, and see you next time on Tob's channel.